By the time I understood that my sister had taught her daughter to be afraid of happiness, June had already learned how to make herself disappear without leaving a room. It was June 18, a warm Thursday evening in Asheville, the kind of early summer day when the mountains looked blue at the edges and every open window carried the smell of cut grass. I had stopped at Corinne's house after work with a folder tucked under my arm and a grocery store bag holding 2 cartons of strawberry ice cream. The folder mattered more. A summer astronomy program at the Nature Center had opened a few late spots for local kids, and I had thought of June before I finished reading the flyer. 2 years earlier, she had been the child who could tell Orion from Cassiopeia before most adults could find the North Star. She used to drag her father into the backyard in pajama pants and insist that clouds were personally insulting her. I expected to find her somewhere near the porch with a book. Instead, I found her standing beside the kitchen counter while everyone else ate dinner. Corinne sat at one end of the table with a glass of iced tea beside her plate. Preston Vale sat across from her, jacket off, sleeves folded neatly to his forearms. He had been in our lives for a little over a year by then, long enough that his expensive watch no longer looked out of place next to Corinne's mismatched everyday dishes. Cole was at the other end of the table, 7 years old and restless, one knee bouncing under his chair. A damp dish towel lay on the floor near him. Water shone across several tiles. June stood with her back against the counter, hands folded loosely at her waist. There was no plate in front of her. I stopped just inside the kitchen. "June?" She looked at me first, and what I saw on her face was not embarrassment. It was warning. Corinne barely glanced up. She told me Cole had spilled his drink, slipped when he jumped away from the puddle, and almost hit his chin on the table. According to her, June had started another mess by distracting him while he was carrying his glass. The consequence, apparently, was that June could eat when everyone else was finished. Preston's fork paused halfway to his plate. I looked at the water, then at Cole, then at June. Cole's shirt was wet down the front. June's was dry. "What did she do?" I asked. Corinne gave me the patient expression she used when she wanted me to understand that I was the difficult person in the room. June had been talking to Cole while he walked. Cole had turned his head. The glass tipped. He slipped. That was enough, in Corinne's logic, to make the whole chain belong to June. "It's fine," June said quickly. Those 2 words landed harder than if she had cried. I had heard children say, "It's fine," when a scraped knee burned, when a friend excluded them, when they had forgotten homework and were trying not to panic. June said it the way someone might say a password she had practiced. I put my bag on the counter and pulled out the chair beside me. "Come eat." Corinne's mouth tightened. She said June was learning that actions had consequences. I remember thinking how normal the sentence sounded. That was part of what had made me slow to understand my sister for so long. Corinne rarely spoke like a monster. She spoke like a tired mother defending standards. She wrapped cruelty in words that belonged on parenting blogs: consequences, accountability, boundaries, respect until you had to look very carefully at who was always paying for them. June did not move. I pulled the chair out farther. "Sit with me." She looked at Corinne before she looked at the chair. That frightened me more than the punishment. Corinne exhaled through her nose but did not stop her. June crossed the kitchen quietly and sat. I fixed her a plate from the serving dishes without making a ceremony of it. Chicken, green beans, roasted potatoes. Her hands rested in her lap until I nudged the fork closer. Preston resumed eating, though more slowly than before. Cole stared at his plate. I thought the moment was over until June leaned toward me and whispered so softly I almost missed it. "What if something happens to you now?" I turned. She was watching my face with complete seriousness. "Because you made Mom stop." My first instinct was to tell her that was ridiculous. I am ashamed of that instinct now, not because the thought was wrong, but because the word would have been, June was not being ridiculous. She was showing me the shape of the world she had been forced to live inside, so I only asked what she meant. Her eyes dropped to her potatoes. Nothing. Corinne heard enough to intervene. She told June not to start, then changed the subject to wedding flowers. That was the first moment that evening when I felt something inside me shift from irritation to unease. Not anger yet, unease, because June had not asked whether Corinne would be angry with me. She had asked whether the universe would punish me for protecting her. I watched more carefully after that. Once you notice a pattern, small things stop looking small. Cole finished first and bounced up from the table despite Corinne reminding him to carry his plate carefully. He reached across the sideboard for one of Preston's glossy wedding invitation samples, the kind with thick cream paper and raised lettering. His fingers were still greasy from dinner. By the time Preston gently took the card away, 2 faint fingerprints marked the corner. Cole froze. His eyes moved immediately to June. Not to Corinne, to June. And June reacted before anyone accused her of anything. I should have told him not to touch it. The words came automatically. Cole looked down. I stared at both children. Corinne gave a weary little laugh, as though this proved something. She said June knew Cole copied everything she did and needed to be more responsible around him. June nodded. That was all. No argument, no. But I wasn't touching it. No protest that Cole had gotten out of his own chair, crossed the room and picked up the card with his own hands. She simply accepted a piece of blame that had been waiting for her before the mistake even happened. I had spent enough years working around children to know the difference between a child who admitted fault and one who had learned that arguing made things worse. Cole's face bothered me too. He was not smirking. He did not seem pleased that his sister was taking the weight. If anything, he looked relieved in a way that made me sadder. At 7, he had already learned where lightning usually struck in that house. When trouble appeared, he checked whether it had found June yet. I helped clear the table while Corinne and Preston talked about seating arrangements. June dried dishes beside me. I did not question her there. I did not want every moment with me to become an investigation into her mother. Instead, I waited until we went out onto the back porch. The sun had fallen behind the trees, though the sky still held that long North Carolina evening light. Cicadas had started up somewhere beyond the fence. June sat sideways in a porch chair with both bare feet tucked under her, and I finally pulled the folder from my bag. Her eyes changed the second she saw the photograph on the front. A telescope stood under a sky full of stars. The Nature Center's summer program included 2 evening observation sessions, a short planetarium workshop, and a meteor tracking project for kids between 9 and 12. I thought of you, I said. For half a second I saw the old June. Her shoulders lifted. Her fingers reached for the page. Then she stopped. No, thank you. It was so polite I nearly laughed. You haven't even read it. I know. She pushed the folder toward me. I told her there were still spaces open, that I could drive her if Corinne agreed, and that the program fell on evenings when I was free. June shook her head harder. I had expected Corinne to be the obstacle. I had not expected June to reject the thing before her mother even had a chance. When I asked why, she picked at a loose thread on the hem of her shorts. She said she had stopped doing things like that. What things? Big things. The cicadas buzzed around us. She meant things she wanted badly. I waited. Eventually she told me that the last time she had made a really big wish, her father disappeared less than a week later. Nathan, even after 21 months, his name could still change the temperature of a room. My brother-in-law had driven away from that house on the 21st of September 2024. His vehicle had gone off a mountain road. Search teams found wreckage, blood, and some of his belongings, but not his body. For months, every member of our family had lived inside a grotesque middle state between hope and mourning. By March of that year, a court had finally declared him dead. Corinne had cried in my mother's arms after the decree arrived. June had not cried at all. She had gone upstairs and closed her bedroom door. I had believed that silence was grief. Now she was telling me something else had been growing underneath it. "What did you wish for?" I asked. June stared through the porch railing. She had wanted her father to stay home more. That was it. Not a pony. Not money. Not some impossible childish fantasy. She had wanted Nathan home, and then he had vanished. I felt the answer before she gave it. Corinne had connected those two things for her somehow. Maybe not in one clean sentence at first. Maybe in 100 smaller ones. "Look what happened after you complained. Your father was upset because of you. Every time you want something, somebody else pays for it." I wanted to ask exactly what Corinne had said. Instead, I looked up at the first visible star. "You used to name them," I said. June gave me a suspicious glance. "You absolutely did." "I was little. You were 8. That was little." Fair point. Another star appeared over the trees. I pointed at the brightest one and asked what she would call it if nobody else had already named it. June studied the sky with grave concentration. For a moment I thought she would refuse. Then she said, "Kevin." I turned to her. "Kevin?" She shrugged. "Why Kevin? It looks like a Kevin." There was no logic to it. None at all. And that was why I laughed. Not loudly. Not enough to embarrass her. Just one startled sound that came out before I could stop it. June fought her smile for perhaps 2 seconds. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. It was a small thing, that smile. But I had known June before she learned caution, and the expression felt like seeing a familiar house through trees after believing the road had disappeared. I did not tell her she needed to laugh more. I did not say, "See? Nothing bad happened." I simply let Kevin remain in the sky. Later, when the porch light came on, I took a small cloth-bound notebook from my work bag. I carried them constantly, because librarians collect blank paper the way other people collect mugs. The cover was dark blue, almost the color of the sky above us. June eyed it. "This isn't homework," I promised. That earned another nearly smile. I opened to the first page and drew 4 simple headings. What happened? What I controlled? What I didn't control? This was not mine to carry. I told her we could use the notebook whenever something happened that felt like her fault. Not to prove Corinne wrong. Not to prove me right. Just to slow things down long enough to separate what June had actually done from everything that had happened around her. For the spilled water, we wrote that Cole had been carrying the glass and turned his head. Under what I controlled, June said she had been talking. I wrote it. Under what I didn't control, after a long pause, she admitted she had not controlled Cole's feet, the water, or where he stepped. Then we reached the last line. I handed her the pencil. She stared at the words. This was not mine to carry. Her fingers tightened. I don't want to write that. Okay. You think I should. I think you should only write it when you believe it. She looked at me for a long time, perhaps waiting for pressure. I closed the notebook. That was the first page. Incomplete. It mattered that way. When we went inside, Corinne was at the kitchen island with Preston, comparing photographs of table settings on his phone. Cole had been sent to brush his teeth. June went to fill a glass of water, and I almost let the evening end there. Then she asked her mother why Nathan had driven away that night. Corinne's hand stopped on Preston's phone. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. June stood near the refrigerator, holding an empty glass. She asked whether her father had already been angry when he left, or whether something happened afterward. The question seemed ordinary until I saw Corinne's face. My sister recovered almost immediately. She said Nathan had come home upset because June had called him while he was busy. June had been emotional. The house became chaotic. Nathan became too upset to stay and drove off to cool down. June lowered her eyes. Something cold moved through me. because that was not the version I remembered. For nearly 2 years, Corinne had told us Nathan left after an argument between the two of them. She had described it repeatedly as a marital fight, an ugly one, yes, but between husband and wife. I remembered sitting beside her during the first week of the search, while she blamed herself for pushing him too hard. I remembered our mother telling her couples fought. I remembered Corinne saying she wished she had let him walk away without following him to the front door. I did not remember June being the cause. Now Corinne was placing her in the center of it. I asked carefully whether she was sure that was what happened. Corinne's eyes met mine. There was a warning in them. She told me grief damaged memory. Everyone remembered that night differently. That might have been true. It was also a convenient answer. June filled her glass and left the kitchen without drinking from it. I did not challenge Corinne further in front of her. I had already watched June calculate the danger of being defended once that evening. I was beginning to understand that every public confrontation had a cost June might pay after I drove home. I stayed another 20 minutes. I helped Cole find one shoe he had somehow lost between dinner and bedtime. Preston walked me to the front porch while Corinne took the children upstairs. He thanked me for the astronomy information and said he hoped June would change her mind. There was nothing false in the way he said it. At that point, I had no reason to think Preston understood what was happening any better than I had. The drive back to my apartment took less than 15 minutes. I spent all 15 arguing with myself. Families have ugly seasons, and none of what I had seen alone proved a child was unsafe. Together, though, the pattern was harder to excuse. June waiting for dinner because of Cole's spill, taking responsibility for his fingerprints, refusing something she loved because wanting felt dangerous, fearing I would be punished for defending her, and now being placed at the center of a story Corinne had once described as a marital fight. I worked in a public elementary school. My training did not require me to diagnose Corinne or predict a future legal finding. It required me to report reasonable concern. I sat in my car outside my building and called County Social Services. The woman taking the report asked calm, practical questions about the children, what I had personally observed, what June had said, and whether there was any immediate physical, medical, or weapons-related danger. I gave her the dinner and punishment pattern, June's fear that defenders could be harmed, and Nathan's disappearance only as context. I did not speculate about the crash. I said only that Corinne's account of why he left had changed. When she asked what relationship I had to the children, I said, "I'm their aunt." My throat tightened around the word. I thought of Evelyn teaching Corinne and me, after our own father died, that grief was something good daughters made easier, never harder. I thought of how often our family had survived pain by lowering our voices around it. For the first time, I wondered how many truths had been mistaken for cruelty, simply because they disturbed the peace. The worker explained that the information would be screened and handled according to their process. There would be no dramatic team arriving in the night because I had made one phone call. There was no immediate removal based on my report. The call was not revenge, and it did not make me June's guardian. It simply meant someone outside our family now knew what I had seen. When I hung up, I stayed in the car. My hands were shaking. Not because I regretted the call, because I understood exactly what it might cost. Corinne knew me too well. She would not need anyone to identify the reporter. There were only so many adults in June's life willing to say that what happened at that dinner table was not normal. I went upstairs and set the astronomy folder on my kitchen table. The blue notebook was still with June. I hoped Corinne would not find it. I hoped June would open it again. Mostly, I hoped I had not waited too long to understand that protecting access to a child and protecting the child were not always the same thing. The next morning, my phone rang before I had finished my first cup of coffee. Corinne's name filled the screen. "I already knew," I answered. Her voice was quiet, which was worse than anger. "I don't know what you told people," she said, But from now on you ask me before you make plans with my children." Then the line went dead. For the next 2 days, Corinne kept her promise. She did not forbid me from seeing June and Cole outright. That would have been too obvious, too easy to name. Instead, every plan suddenly required approval that came late or not at all. A trip to the library became inconvenient. An afternoon at my apartment conflicted with wedding errands. A phone call had to wait until after dinner, then after baths, then until the children were supposedly too tired. Corinne never once said that County Social Services had identified me as the person who called, because they had not. She did not need proof. She only needed to look at the circle of adults around June and ask herself who had finally stopped pretending the pattern was normal. The county assessment began before the end of that week. I was not in Corinne's house when the worker first visited, and I did not pretend later that I knew what happened behind that closed door. What I learned came in pieces afterward, mostly from June and Cole, with some of it filtered through Corinne's complaints about the indignity of strangers asking questions inside her home. The worker spoke with the family rather than arriving with police or carrying children out the front door. Corinne answered questions calmly. She described herself as a widow raising 2 children after a catastrophic loss. She spoke about grief, adjustment, June's anxiety, Cole's age, the upcoming wedding, and the exhausting burden of trying to hold a broken household together. It was a version of the truth arranged carefully enough to resemble honesty. June told me later that she had mostly answered yes or no. When the worker asked how punishment worked at home, June said sometimes she lost privileges. When asked whether she felt safe, she said yes. When asked why she sometimes believed bad things happened because of her, she became quiet. Cole, being 7, was less controlled. He repeated things. Mom said June worried too much. Mom said June could make a normal day into a disaster if everyone let her. Mom said June was older and should know better. He did not say those things with malice. He said them the way children recite the rules of a game they did not invent. Corinne called me after the visit. She did not ask whether I had reported her. She spoke as if the answer had already settled somewhere permanent between us. She said the worker had seen 2 well-fed children in a clean house, with no bruises, no locked doors, no obvious emergency. Her voice carried the weary triumph of someone who believed that if harm could not be photographed, it could not exist. I did not argue. That surprised her more than an argument would have. I told her, I hoped the process helped everyone. Then I let the silence sit there. What I had learned from the first call to social services was painfully simple. I could not control what the agency concluded, how fast anything moved, or whether Corinne would cooperate sincerely. My responsibility was narrower. I had to tell the truth about what I saw. I had to keep telling it when new facts appeared. I had to stop confusing the absence of catastrophe with the presence of safety. 3 days later, Corinne finally agreed that I could take June and Cole to a summer literacy program at the public library, where I was helping coordinate activities twice a week. The program was informal enough to feel like summer, and structured enough that children still had something to show for the hours they spent there. That afternoon included a short astronomy activity connected to the Nature Center's stargazing event I had mentioned to June. I did not bring up the flyer again. I did not have to. One of the volunteers pinned several student projects from the final weeks of school beside the astronomy table as examples of how reading could connect with science. June's was there, a carefully illustrated piece about the phases of the moon. Her name had been printed neatly under it. I already knew she had done the project before summer break. What I had not known was that her teacher had singled it out as one of the strongest in the class. June saw me reading the little note beside it and immediately turned away. When I asked why she had never told me, she said it was not important. That answer had become another password. It's fine. It's not important. I don't mind. The phrases changed. The function did not. I waited until we were carrying a stack of returned books toward the children's area before I asked again. June kept her eyes on the spines in her arms. She told me her teacher had wanted to send home a photograph of the project, and a note about how well she had done. June had asked her not to make a big deal out of it. Why? She stopped beside a shelf of animal books. For several seconds, I thought she would refuse to answer. Then she said, Corinne had once told her that whenever she made herself the center of something good, something bad followed. The exact sentence mattered less than the idea June had taken from it. Praise was dangerous, because praise made the world notice her. I felt the old anger rise. I pushed it down before June could see it. What happened after the project? I asked. Nothing. Anything bad? She shook her head. I let that fact stand by itself. No speech, no victory, just nothing. Sometimes nothing was evidence too. At the end of the program, June lingered near the astronomy table while Cole tried to balance 3 foam planets on his head. He failed repeatedly, and with enormous confidence. On the 4th attempt, Saturn rolled under a chair and he crawled after it. June laughed once before catching herself. That almost laugh had begun happening more often around me. They were small sounds, always followed by a pause, as if she were waiting for the universe to issue a correction. I wanted to tell her she was allowed to enjoy something without checking the horizon afterward. But children do not usually abandon a belief, because adults give them a better sentence. They abandon it when experience keeps contradicting it. So I waited. 2 evenings later, I was back at Corinne's house. Wedding boxes had begun multiplying in every room. Thick envelopes, ribbon samples, place cards, and small decorative pieces sat stacked along one side of the dining room. Preston's company owned several upscale properties in the region, and although he was not the kind of man who talked openly about money, the wedding had the polished scale money makes possible without needing to announce itself. Everything seemed to arrive in tissue paper. Cole had been told not to touch one particular box. Naturally, that made it irresistible. I was in the living room with June when I heard the crack. It was not loud, but every child in the house knew what it meant before the adults did. Cole stood beside the dining table, holding 2 pieces of a small ceramic bud vase meant for one of the wedding centerpieces. One side had split cleanly when it hit the hardwood floor, his face emptied. Corinne came in from the kitchen, and Cole looked at June the same reflexive search for the place blame usually went. June had been on the couch beside me the entire time. Corinne saw the broken vase, saw Cole holding it, and still somehow arrived at June. She did not claim June had touched it. The logic was more elastic than that. June had been the one who had gotten Cole excited earlier. June had encouraged him to play near the boxes. June knew her brother copied her. June was older. June should have been paying attention. Then Corinne announced that the library outing we had planned for Saturday was canceled. For June. Not Cole. I watched the girl beside me fold her hands in her lap. No protest. No shock. That was what finally made the injustice unbearable. Not that June was surprised by it, but that she was not. I asked Corinne why June was losing a privilege for something Cole had broken. Corinne said she was teaching responsibility. I looked at Cole, still holding the broken vase. Even he seemed confused by the word. Preston had come in behind Corinne by then. His gaze moved from Cole to the vase to June. He did not challenge Corinne in front of the children, but his expression changed a crease between his brows. A pause too long before he bent to take the broken pieces from Cole. Corinne told June to go upstairs. June stood immediately. I wanted to stop her, but I had learned something since that dinner. If every intervention ended with Corinne cutting another thread between us, June could become more isolated because I needed to feel brave. So I did not create a scene. Instead, later, when Corinne sent Cole outside to help Preston carry empty boxes to the recycling bin, I went with him. He dragged a flattened cardboard box across the driveway while I walked beside him. For a while I said nothing. Children often feel silence better when adults stop interrogating it. Halfway to the bin, Cole blurted out that June had not broken the vase. I know. He kicked at a pebble and admitted he had pulled the box toward himself because he wanted to see the little ceramic vase. It slid out, He tried to catch it and missed. I asked why he had looked at June when Corinne came in. His small shoulders rose. Then he said something that stayed with me. "Don't tell Mom. She gets scary when the story changes. Not when people lied. Not when someone broke something. When the story changed." I crouched beside the recycling bin so we were closer to eye level. I told him he was not responsible for managing an adult's reaction. I did not ask him to confront Corinne. I did not turn a 7-year-old into my witness. I only told him that telling the truth about what he had done was allowed, even if someone else was angry about it. He nodded without looking convinced. That evening, I found June sitting on the back steps. The blue notebook rested beside her. I sat without asking whether I could read it. After a while, she opened to the second page. Under what happened, she had written in careful block letters. Cole broke it. Under what I controlled, I was in the living room. Under what I didn't control, what he touched. At the bottom, beneath this was not mine to carry, she had written one thing. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. A question mark was not freedom, but it was no longer surrender either. I told her that a question was enough for now. She closed the notebook. A car door shut in the driveway, and Preston came around the side of the house carrying a long, flat package. He had been in and out most of the afternoon, dealing with wedding deliveries and phone calls. When he saw us, he smiled at June and held the parcel up. "I found something for you." Corinne came through the screen door behind him, but did not stop him from handing it over. Inside was a large illustrated atlas of the night sky. The kind of book I would have wanted at 10. Constellations, planets, star maps, photographs from observatories. June's fingers brushed the cover, but did not close around it. For a painful second, I thought she would refuse. Preston did not push the gift toward her. He simply set it beside the notebook and told her he had seen it in a bookstore near one of his properties and remembered she used to like stars. There was nothing performative in it. I had been suspicious of Preston mostly because of proximity. He was wealthy, polished, and preparing to marry my sister, while her daughter seemed to be disappearing by inches. It would have been emotionally convenient if he were cruel too. He was not. At least, not in the way Corinne was. He was a man being given a story by the person he trusted. Corinne supplied the explanation almost immediately. She said June had become fixated on disasters since Nathan died, and that sometimes encouraging astronomy only fed that fixation. Her tone was affectionate enough to sound protective. Preston glanced at June. June looked down. I watched him absorb Corinne's version because he had no competing framework yet. A grieving daughter, a tired mother, an aunt who worried too much. It was believable because most damaging family stories are believable when told one piece at a time. June finally picked up the atlas. "Thank you," Preston smiled. "That should have been the whole moment." Then Corinne added that June should not turn it into another obsession. June's hands tightened around the book. I saw the joy enter and leave her in less than 5 seconds. The next afternoon, I got permission to take both children out for ice cream. Corinne made a point of saying yes, as if demonstrating that I was irrational to think she intended to isolate anyone. She reminded me to have them back before dinner and told Cole not to ruin his shirt. It had been hot all day, the kind of sticky June heat that makes the mountains disappear into haze. The forecast had called for thunderstorms by late afternoon. I checked it before we left because I had promised Cole we could sit outside if the weather held. We made it through most of our ice cream before the sky darkened. Cole ordered chocolate and somehow managed to get it on one elbow. June chose strawberry. After nearly a full minute of insisting, she did not care what flavor she got. I finally told her I was not asking which flavor would inconvenience everyone least. I was asking which one she wanted. She looked at the menu. Strawberry. The decision was tiny. I treated it as ordinary. That was harder than celebrating it. We sat under the awning outside the shop. Cars moved along the wet-looking asphalt even though the rain had not started yet. Thunder rolled somewhere west of us. June's spoon stopped. I saw the change immediately. Her shoulders drew up. What? She looked toward the clouds. I shouldn't have come. The sentence was so soft Cole kept eating. I knew exactly where her mind had gone. A pleasant afternoon. A choice she had made. Something bad approaching. Another equation. The first drops hit the pavement. June stared at them. I pulled out my phone. Not to distract her. To show her something. The weather app still displayed the forecast I had checked before we left. Thunderstorms developing late afternoon. High probability of rain. Radar line already moving east before we had ordered anything. I turned the screen toward her. I showed her the timestamp. I showed her the storm band. This was already coming. She studied the radar. Rain began drumming on the awning. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked at my phone again and asked, completely straight-faced, "So the weather app is bad luck too?" I laughed before I could stop myself. Cole looked up, confused, then laughed because I was laughing. June tried to hold her expression. She failed. The smile came first. Then a real laugh, not the careful little sound from the astronomy table. A laugh that escaped before she could ask permission. The storm hit hard enough that people inside the shop turned to look through the windows. Water poured from the awning in silver sheets. Thunder rolled again. Nothing happened to us. Nothing broke. No one disappeared. Nobody was punished. We sat there eating melting ice cream, while a storm that had existed on a radar map before June chose Strawberry passed over Asheville, exactly as predicted. I did not point out the lesson. June already had. By the time the rain eased, Cole had made a dam out of napkins, and June was arguing with him about whether chocolate ice cream counted as structural material. For 20 minutes, they sounded like children. I carried that sound with me when I drove them back. Corinne was waiting in the driveway. She did not mention the canceled library outing or the broken vase. She checked Cole's shirt, saw the chocolate stain, and sighed. June climbed out, holding the astronomy atlas against her chest. Corinne's eyes moved to it, then to me. I could feel the distance returning before either of us spoke. I hugged the children goodbye. June held on a second longer than usual. Then Corinne told them to go inside. June walked toward the house. At the porch, she stopped. Corinne had turned away to say something to Cole. June doubled back 2 steps, fast enough that I nearly missed what she was doing. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm, then she ran inside. I did not open it until I was back in my car. The paper had been torn from the blue notebook. June's handwriting filled only 2 lines. Mom says Dad left because of me. Below it, smaller. I remember them fighting before he knew I was awake. I read June's note 3 times before I started the car. Mom says Dad left because of me. I remember them fighting before he knew I was awake. The rain had stopped, but drops still slid down the windshield in slow, crooked lines. Through them, Corinne's house looked softened around the edges, porch lights reflected in the wet driveway. The kind of ordinary family home no stranger would have looked at twice. I could see movement behind the curtains. Cole crossed the living room, holding something over his head. A shadow that was probably Corinne followed him toward the stairs. June did not come back to the window. I folded the paper along the crease she had already made and put it inside my wallet. I did not call Corinne. I did not call the old investigator on Nathan's missing person case. I did not sit in the driveway and convince myself that an 8-year-old's memory of a sentence heard through a wall was proof of anything. That discipline mattered. June had already spent almost 2 years living inside someone else's explanation of what she remembered. The last thing she needed was for me to replace Corinne's certainty with my own. What I needed first was to understand what June actually remembered, not what I hoped she remembered, not what frightened me. The next few days gave me very little access to her. Corinne had become skilled at technically allowing contact, while making it difficult enough that every conversation felt borrowed. She answered texts hours later. She kept the children busy with wedding appointments, clothes, fittings, and visits to Preston's property. When I called, June was often in the same room with someone else. The county assessment had not produced any dramatic change. That was exactly what I had expected after my first report, but expectation did not make patience easier. Someone had spoken with the children. Someone had spoken with Corinne. The machinery existed now outside our family, slow and imperfect, and I had to resist the childish urge to believe that once an adult in authority saw what I saw, they would immediately make everything simple. Real life does not usually reward truth that quickly. My opportunity came through Evelyn. My mother still hated what I had done, even though she had never asked me directly whether I had called social services. Corinne had told her enough that she could draw the same conclusion. For several days, Evelyn answered my messages with the thin politeness she used when anger and maternal disappointment were competing for control. But she loved June. That was the crack in every argument. When I asked whether she would let June call me while the children were at her house one afternoon, she agreed. I drove nowhere. I sat at my own kitchen table with the blue mountains barely visible through the humidity beyond my window and waited for the phone to ring. When June's face appeared on the screen, she looked younger than 10. She had tied her hair back badly, one side tighter than the other. Behind her, I could see the edge of my mother's sunroom and a basket of folded laundry. Evelyn stayed somewhere nearby, but out of the frame. I could hear dishes occasionally. I did not begin with the note. I asked about her week. She told me Cole had lost a shoe again. Apparently, he had worn both shoes to Evelyn's house and then somehow ended up with one by lunch. That was plausible for Cole. June almost smiled. We talked about a book from the summer program. I asked whether Kevin was still visible from her porch. She told me Kevin was probably offended that I had not learned his official astronomical name. Only after her breathing had settled into something easy did I bring up the paper. I kept it, I said. Her eyes moved immediately toward the side of the room where Evelyn was. You're not in trouble. I know. She did not sound as though she knew. I asked whether she wanted to tell me what she remembered. For a while she rubbed her thumb over one corner of the phone case. Then she said she had been in bed that night, the 21st of September 2024. She remembered being awake because Corinne and Nathan were arguing downstairs. Not shouting at first. That distinction mattered to her. She corrected herself when she used the word fighting. She said they had been talking loudly, then louder. She could not remember the beginning. What do you remember hearing? June closed her eyes. I watched her resist the urge to give me an answer, just because I had asked. Finally, she said, Dad said, "This stops tonight." The words went through me with a strange familiarity, not because I remembered hearing them, but because they sounded like Nathan when he had finally reached the end of his patience. He was not a man who enjoyed confrontation. His anger rarely arrived hot. It accumulated quietly until a sentence came out flat and final. I asked what Corinne had said. June opened her eyes. I don't know. Anything at all? She shook her head, then stopped. There was something about taking. Taking what? I don't know. She looked frustrated with herself. Taking us, maybe. Or taking them. I don't know. I told her that was enough. She immediately tried to correct herself again, saying maybe she had dreamed part of it because Corinne had told her later that children remember things wrong when they are scared. I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my voice even. Sometimes people remember pieces. That doesn't mean you have to fill in the missing ones. June absorbed that. No demand for certainty. No adult telling her what the sentence must have meant. That seemed to calm her more than reassurance. She said she remembered getting out of bed after the voices became louder. She did not go downstairs. She stood in the hallway near the top of the staircase. The light from the kitchen was on. Nathan came upstairs after the argument. That was as far as she got before Evelyn appeared behind her. My mother did not interrupt, but I saw the concern in her face. Not concern about June, concern about what we were doing. I asked June if she wanted to stop. She nodded. We stopped. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about the words, "This stops tonight." They did not prove anything, but they connected to something I had almost forgotten, a phone call from Nathan. It had come weeks before the crash, maybe 3, maybe 4. I had been shelving books after school and answered with my shoulder pressed against the phone, because both hands were full. At the time, nothing about the call had seemed important enough to preserve perfectly. Nathan had asked whether, if things became difficult at home, June and Cole could stay with me or Evelyn for a weekend. I had laughed lightly and told him, of course. Then I asked whether he and Corinne were all right. He said they were having a rough patch. That was how Nathan described trouble, by sanding the edges off the language until it sounded manageable. A rough patch. Things too loud at home. Maybe the kids needing somewhere calm. He had not asked whether he could stay. He had asked about the children. At the time, I assumed he and Corinne needed space to argue without June and Cole hearing it. Married people fought. Parents sometimes sent children to Grandma's house for a weekend. Nothing about it had frightened me. Now the question felt different. I sat at my desk that evening and tried to remember exactly what the family had been like before Nathan disappeared. That was harder than remembering one dramatic night. Patterns hide inside routine. Corinne had always been more impatient with June than with Cole. Even before the crash, I had noticed it. June was older, more sensitive, more likely to ask why. Cole was little and charming, and still at the age when adults treated most mistakes as accidents. If Cole cried after June took a toy, Corinne assumed June should have known better. If Cole became overstimulated at a family dinner, Corinne sometimes blamed June for winding him up. If June objected to being held responsible for something he did, Corinne called her dramatic. I had challenged some of those moments. Not enough. I had also explained many of them away. Older child, younger sibling, tired mother, stress. The ordinary mathematics families used to divide unfairness into acceptable pieces. But one thing became clear as I went back through my memories. I had never heard Corinne call June bad luck while Nathan was alive. Not once. There had been favoritism. There had been blame. There had been a dangerous habit of making June responsible for the emotional weather of the house. But the superstition came later, after the mountain road, after the search teams, after uncertainty became grief. The timing changed the meaning. Whatever had happened before Nathan disappeared, Corinne had not spent June's entire childhood believing she was cursed. Something changed after September 21. The next piece came from Evelyn, almost by accident. She invited me over on a Sunday afternoon, partly because she wanted help moving a heavy planter, and partly, I suspected, because refusing to see me had begun to feel childish even to her. We worked outside first. My mother was 64 and still insisted she could move objects designed for 3 landscapers if given enough time and bad judgment. I made her stop after she nearly tipped the planter onto her own foot. She accused me of becoming bossy in middle age. I reminded her I was still 34 for another few days. "Enjoy it," she said. 35 is where your knees begin filing complaints. It was the first ordinary exchange we had managed since the DSS report. I took it. Afterward, we sat in her kitchen drinking iced tea. For several minutes, we talked about nothing important. Then Evelyn asked what June had told me on the phone. I could have hidden it. Instead, I said exactly what June had said, and no more. My mother's fingers tightened around her glass when I repeated Nathan's words. "This stops tonight." She stared down at the condensation pooling beneath her hand. I asked whether the phrase meant anything to her. She said no. Too quickly. I waited. Evelyn had spent most of her life winning arguments by outlasting silence. I had inherited enough of her to use the same weapon. Finally, she sighed. The night Nathan disappeared, Corinne had called her late. Not immediately. Late. Evelyn could not remember the exact minute, but she remembered she had already changed into pajamas. Corinne was frantic. Nathan had not come back. She said he had driven off angry. My mother went straight to the house. That part I knew. What I had not known was that Corinne had not been there the whole time. Evelyn told me that according to what she remembered, Nathan left first. Corinne stayed home perhaps 15 or 20 minutes. Then she took her SUV and went after him. I put my glass down. What? Evelyn immediately qualified it. Corinne had been worried. Maybe she wanted to find him. Maybe she had driven some of his usual routes. Maybe the timeline was wrong after almost 2 years. But the core memory remained. Corinne left. And later, she came back. That did not match the version we had all repeated afterward. The version in which Corinne stayed home waiting for Nathan to cool off. The version she had apparently given investigators. I asked why Evelyn had never said anything. Her face hardened, defensive, because shame often arrives dressed as irritation. She said she had never thought there was anything to say. Corinne had driven around looking for her husband. That was not suspicious. By the time anyone understood Nathan's vehicle had gone off the mountain, the whole night had become chaos. Then she remembered something else. The morning after Nathan disappeared, Evelyn had taken a photograph of Cole in the driveway. I almost laughed from disbelief. A photograph? She explained that a relative in Charlotte had been calling repeatedly, wanting to know whether the children were all right. Cole had been outside in pajamas holding a red plastic truck, and Evelyn took a quick picture to prove that at least physically the children were safe. The picture itself was meaningless. That was why I believed the memory. Nobody had photographed Corinne's SUV as evidence. Nobody had framed it dramatically. It just happened to be in the driveway behind Cole. Do you still have it? Evelyn looked uncomfortable. Probably. She did not reach for her phone. Not yet. I could see the line inside her. On one side was curiosity. On the other was her daughter. I did not push. That restraint cost me something. But I was starting to understand that if I forced Evelyn toward a conclusion she was not ready to reach, she would run backward toward Corinne simply to escape me. So I let the photograph stay where it was. For now. Before I left, I asked one more question. Mom, when did Corinne start saying June was bad luck? Evelyn's face changed. She knew immediately what I meant. Not the general blame. The phrase. She leaned back and looked toward the window over the sink. Then she said she remembered the first time. The search had been going for days. Crews had found part of Nathan's vehicle down the slope and some personal items, but weather and terrain made the recovery difficult. Every phone call sent the adults in the house running toward it. June had barely slept. One evening, a search team liaison came by, or called, I could no longer remember which, and told them there was still no confirmed sign of Nathan alive. June began crying. Not loudly. She kept asking whether her father would have been on that road if she had not called him home earlier. Corinne was exhausted, hollowed out and angry at everyone, and she snapped. Evelyn remembered the sentence because of how cruel it sounded even then. Something about June being bad luck. Everything going wrong around her. My mother had told Corinne to stop. Corinne cried afterward. That detail surprised me. She had cried, not performed grief, not defended herself. According to Evelyn, she had looked horrified by what she had said. For a moment, that complicated everything. It would have been easier if Corinne had invented the phrase coldly from the start. But human beings rarely become their worst selves in one clean decision. Sometimes the first cruelty is an accident. The second is a choice. The 100th is a system. I drove home with that thought following me. The next week, Corinne called about the wedding. At first, the conversation sounded ordinary. Seating arrangements had changed. Preston's property manager needed final guest numbers. The ceremony was now close enough that every conversation in Corinne's life seemed to pass through August 29 eventually. Then she shifted to June. She said I was keeping her stuck in grief by encouraging questions about Nathan. I reminded her I had not told June what to remember. Corinne said that did not matter. I had given the child a notebook that taught her to analyze every family interaction as if she were collecting evidence against her mother. I almost corrected the word evidence. I stopped myself. That would only reveal how much the contradiction about Nathan bothered me. Instead, I asked whether June still had the notebook. Corinne ignored the question. Then she mentioned a program, the same one she had referred to earlier. She said that after the wedding, once the household settled, she was considering sending June somewhere that specialized in children who could not move past traumatic fixation. I asked whether she meant therapy. She said more than therapy. A structured environment, distance, a reset. The words were carefully chosen. None sounded cruel by itself. Together they frightened me. Where? Corinne went quiet. I could hear paper moving on her end of the call. Wedding paperwork, perhaps? Then she said, somewhere June can stop infecting every good thing with what happened to Nathan. The sentence landed differently from bad luck, less accidental, less grief-stricken, more organized. And for the first time, I wondered whether Corinne was no longer afraid of what June believed. I wondered whether she needed her to keep believing it. The word Corinne used stayed with me long after the call ended. Infecting. Somewhere June could stop infecting every good thing with what happened to Nathan. I had heard parents use the language of treatment before. Support, structure, reset, fresh start, and sometimes those words described exactly what a struggling child needed. That was why I did not treat therapeutic program as proof of anything sinister. The next morning, I found the program from the location and brochure language Corinne had mentioned. It was a legitimate residential facility several hours away, with licensed clinicians, structured classes, family sessions and services for children dealing with anxiety, trauma, and family conflict. The problem was not the existence of the program. It was the version of June Corinne could put on an application. Grief, fixated, disruptive around happy events, destabilizing her younger brother, resistant to her mother. Remove the household pattern that produced June's fear, and the child herself could be made to look like the pathology. I closed the website, wanting one question asked before anybody called distance a cure. Why did June need to be removed from the very adults who kept reminding her that she did not cause disasters? A few days later, I got less than an hour with her. Corinne allowed Evelyn to bring both children to meet me at a public park. After telling my mother the visit had to remain short, she called it compromise. Evelyn called it keeping the peace. I had begun to hate that phrase so much. I could feel it physically whenever someone used it, like a small stone under my tongue. June arrived carrying the blue notebook. She held it against her stomach. Cole ran ahead toward the playground, then remembered he had been told not to go too far and stopped so abruptly his sneakers slid in the dirt. June watched him. That reflex again. Always watching for the beginning of the next accident. We sat beneath a large oak where the shade was cooler than the rest of the park. Evelyn took Cole toward the swings. I did not mention the program immediately. I asked June how she was. She said fine. There it was. The password. I waited. Eventually, she opened the notebook without looking at me. Several pages now contained small entries. Most were incomplete. One described the thunderstorm from our ice cream trip. Under what I didn't control, she had written, weather. The final line was blank. With June's permission, I photographed the pages she had already chosen to show me the spill, the storm, and one unfinished entry about Nathan, so she would not have to depend on memory if the notebook was ever taken out of reach. I told her the copies were hers too. I would not share them simply because I had them. I smiled despite myself. Progress sometimes looked like one word. She turned the page before I could say anything. Then she asked whether I knew where Corinne wanted to send her. I told her I had found information about the program, but I did not know what decision had actually been made. June picked at the edge of the notebook cover. Mom says it would be a fresh start. I nodded. What do you think? She took so long to answer that I could hear Cole shouting from the swings. Finally, she said maybe it was better. For who? Her eyes stayed on the notebook. Everybody. The word was almost too soft to hear. She explained that things had been worse since I started asking questions. Corinne was angry more often. Evelyn and Corinne were fighting. Cole had started getting nervous whenever anyone mentioned Nathan. Preston had wedding things to worry about. If June went away, perhaps the house could become normal again. Mom and Cole could have a normal life. There was no self-pity in her voice. That was what hurt. She was offering herself as a solution. At 10 years old, June had taken every adult conflict surrounding her and reached the conclusion that the kindest thing she could do was remove herself from it. Until then, I had understood her wound mostly as fear. If I want something, something bad may happen. If I enjoy something, somebody might pay. Now the belief had moved. If I am absent, maybe everybody else will be safer. I had to look away for a second. A family walked past us carrying a picnic cooler. Somewhere behind the playground, a dog barked at a squirrel with absurd outrage. Ordinary life continued with almost insulting ease. I wanted to take June by both shoulders and tell her none of this belonged to her. Instead, I asked the question the notebook had taught me to ask. What part of Mom and Cole having a normal life can you control? She frowned. I can go. That's an action you can take. I'm asking whether you control what kind of family they become afterward. She stared at the page. No. Do you control whether Mom is angry? No. Do you control whether adults disagree with each other? Her pencil moved under her thumb. No. I left it there. I had learned not to rush toward the sentence I wanted. June had spent too long being told what conclusions to reach. Even a kinder conclusion became another form of pressure if I forced it into her mouth. When Evelyn called us back because the hour was nearly over, June closed the ledger. As she stood, she said almost casually, "If I go, you won't have to fight with Mom anymore." That sentence followed me all the way home. I called the county office that afternoon. Not to make a new accusation, not to demand removal. I explained that I had already made a report and had new information relevant to the ongoing concern. I described Corinne's plan to send June to a residential program after the wedding, June's statement that everyone might have a normal life if she left, and the child's returning memory that her parents had been arguing before Nathan disappeared. I was careful with the last part. I did not call June a witness. I did not call Corinne a criminal. At that point, neither description belonged to me. I simply said that June's memories of the night her father vanished seemed to be changing or returning, while her mother was simultaneously increasing pressure to place her far from the relatives she trusted. The worker asked practical questions: whether the program had accepted June, whether a departure date existed, whether there was immediate physical danger, whether June had expressed wanting to harm herself. I answered no, where no was the truth. June did not want to die. She wanted to become less present. That distinction felt terribly important. The worker explained that the new information could be added to the assessment and considered along with family services and safety planning. Again, there was no movie version of intervention. No promise that by morning someone would solve the household. I was beginning to understand that protecting June might consist of dozens of unglamorous acts whose usefulness I could not measure immediately. Report. Document. Listen. Do not exaggerate. Do not surrender. The hardest part was accepting that lawful systems moved more slowly than a frightened child's beliefs. Corinne called that evening. She did not mention social services directly. She did not need to. She told me I was no longer to pick June up alone. Any visits would happen only if she or Evelyn approved them. No spontaneous library trips. No afternoons at my apartment. No taking the children anywhere without written confirmation. "You keep pretending you're helping," she said. "And every time you do, June gets worse." I almost defended myself. Then I heard the sentence underneath hers. "Every time June trusted me, Corinne lost control over the explanation." I told her I would follow lawful boundaries and that I would continue being available to the children. Her laugh was brief and joyless. She said availability was not the same as entitlement. On that point, she was legally right. I was their aunt, not their parent. I could not walk into Corinne's house and remove June because I believed my sister was damaging her. I could not enroll her somewhere else. I could not cancel a residential placement simply because I distrusted the motive behind it. That imbalance of power was real. Pretending otherwise would have made me reckless. But parental authority was not invisibility. It did not mean no one could question what happened behind the front door. For the first time, I began thinking of my role less as rescuing June and more as making sure there was always at least one honest record outside Corinne's version of events. The next blow came from Evelyn. My mother arrived at my apartment 2 days later without calling first. She stood in the doorway holding her purse tightly against her body, which usually meant she had rehearsed a speech in the car. I made coffee. She did not drink it. She told me she would no longer arrange meetings between me and the children unless Corinne agreed in advance. I stared at her. Evelyn said the fighting had become unbearable. Corinne accused her of taking sides. June was caught between adults. Cole was confused. The wedding was 6 weeks away. Everyone needed to calm down. "You told me Corinne left after Nathan." My mother's mouth tightened. "I told you what I think I remember. You told me she left 15 or 20 minutes later. And now you're turning that into something else." "I haven't turned it into anything." She looked toward the window. The anger I felt toward Evelyn was different from what I felt toward Corinne. Corinne made me furious. Evelyn made me tired. Because my mother could see enough to know something was wrong and still keep reaching for neutrality, as if neutrality itself were virtue. She reminded me that memory after almost 2 years was unreliable, that grief distorted things, that if she began accusing her own daughter based on a confused night in 2024, there would be no taking it back. I understood those words. I even respected part of them. But all I heard emotionally was another door closing between June and me. "So you're choosing Corinne." Evelyn flinched. I regretted the sentence as soon as it left my mouth, not because I suddenly believed she was right, but because it reduced her to the kind of simple position I had been demanding others not assign to June. Still, my mother did not correct me. She only picked up her purse. "I'm not helping you go around her anymore." Then she left. For several days, I heard almost nothing from June. Corinne answered one text to say the children were busy. Preston sent me a neutral message about a wedding schedule change but did not mention the family conflict. I did not use him as a backdoor to the children. I had no idea then how much he had started noticing on his own. The silence was unbearable because I could imagine too much inside it. June deciding she had caused another argument. June watching Evelyn step backward and concluding even Grandma was safer when she stopped defending her. June hearing Corinne describe the program as help, until leaving began to sound like a kindness she owed everyone. I kept working. Books still had to be processed for summer programming. Parents still returned paperbacks with sand between the pages. Children still forgot water bottles. My birthday passed quietly in early July. 35 arrived, with a grocery store cupcake from a coworker and a voicemail from Evelyn that said she loved me but carefully avoided everything that mattered. 2 days later, she called again. This time, she asked whether I could meet the children at the library for half an hour. I did not ask what had changed. I said yes before she finished the sentence. It was not a secret meeting. Evelyn had arranged to bring them into town for errands and said Corinne knew they would stop at the library. Whether Corinne knew I would be there, I could not tell. I did not waste the time finding out. June came through the front doors holding Cole's hand. She looked thinner to me, though I knew fear could make adults see changes that were not there. The blue ledger was missing. I did not ask about it. We sat in a quiet corner near the children's shelves, while Evelyn browsed nearby. Cole fidgeted for nearly 5 minutes. Then he reached into the pocket of his shorts and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He pushed it toward June. I fixed it. June looked confused. She unfolded the page. I recognized it immediately as paper from the ledger. A page had been torn out. Across the center, in Cole's large, uneven handwriting, he had written, "I broke the vase. June didn't." Underneath was a drawing. At least, I assumed it was a vase. It looked more like a potato, with handles and 3 legs. June stared at it. Her mouth twitched. "What is that?" "A vase. It has feet. They're cracks. It looks like it's running away." Cole frowned at the picture, as if reconsidering his artistic choices. June laughed, not carefully. For perhaps 10 seconds, she was just an older sister making fun of her little brother's terrible drawing. Cole became offended enough to defend it. He insisted the object looked exactly like the one he had broken. June told him that if their vase had looked like that before it fell, breaking it might have been an improvement. I laughed too. Then June's expression changed. Her eyes returned to the sentence above the drawing. "I broke the vase. June didn't." Cole had given something up in writing, the safety of being the child whose mistakes flowed downhill. His face became serious. "I told you," he said. June stopped smiling. He did not need to explain further. Something passed between them that belonged more to siblings than adults. June reached over and pressed the paper flat on the table. "Thanks," Cole shrugged with exaggerated carelessness. Then he wandered toward a shelf of graphic novels. I watched him go. That was when I noticed the faint writing above his. Older handwriting. June's. The page had not originally been about the vase. I turned it toward the light. A crease ran through the center where she had folded or crushed it before tearing it from the notebook. Near the top, under "What Happened," were several half-erased words. I did not read them aloud. June saw what I was looking at. Her face went still. "Can I read this?" She hesitated, then nodded. The first lines were uncertain fragments. Dad left. Mom was mad. I was awake. And below them, written more firmly than the rest, "Mom left after Dad." I stopped breathing for a second. Not because the sentence proved a crime. It did not. It proved only that at some point, before investigators had reopened anything, before I had begun asking about Corinne's SUV, before Evelyn told me her own memory, June had already written down the same sequence. Nathan left. Corinne followed. June had recorded it privately. Then she had torn the page out. "When did you write this?" June looked toward Evelyn. "Before." "Before what?" "Before you asked Grandma about that night." I kept my reaction small. If I treated the page like treasure, June might begin shaping memories toward what she thought I wanted. I asked why she had torn it out. Her answer hurt more than I expected. "Mom said you were making me remember things wrong." So June had destroyed the page, because she had begun doubting whether the memory was hers. Cole had saved it, because he wanted to confess about a vase. The absurdity and sadness of that almost broke me. One child had been trained to surrender blame. The other had begun trying to return it. And somewhere between them, a piece of paper had survived. I folded the page carefully, then stopped. It belonged to June. I slid it back toward her. "You decide where this stays." She looked surprised. I could have photographed it. I could have insisted she give it to me. I could already imagine how adults might later care about the date and wording. But right then it was her notebook page. Not evidence. Not mine. June folded it and put it in the atlas Preston had given her, between 2 pages showing the summer constellations. When Evelyn returned to the table, she saw our faces and knew something had happened. I did not explain in front of the children. We finished the visit by helping Cole find a book about volcanoes. June chose one about meteor showers. For the first time since I had offered her the summer astronomy program, she did not put the book back after picking it up. I noticed. I said nothing. 20 minutes later, Evelyn drove them away. That evening, I received no call from Corinne. No accusation. No warning. The silence felt almost worse. At 10:17, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. I opened it expecting another plea for peace. Instead, Evelyn had written one sentence. "I'm not choosing Corinne. I'm checking whether I'm about to accuse my own daughter of something I can never take back." Evelyn did not answer when I called after her message. That was probably deliberate. "I'm not choosing Corinne. I'm checking whether I'm about to accuse my own daughter of something I can never take back." I read those words until I could hear my mother's voice inside them. Fear disguised as caution. Love tangled with shame. The instinct to protect her child colliding with the possibility that her child might have done something protection could not excuse. For once, I did not push. If Evelyn was finally willing to look backward without immediately explaining away what she found, then the worst thing I could do was turn her uncertainty into another family argument. So I waited. 3 days later, she sent me a photograph. There was no explanation attached. At first, I almost missed what mattered. The picture showed Cole on the morning after Nathan disappeared. He was 5 years old, standing at the edge of my mother's driveway in blue pajamas and rain boots that were too large for him. He held a red plastic truck against his chest. His face looked solemn and sleepy. Behind him, the sky was pale from the storm that had passed through during the night. It was exactly the kind of photograph people take during a crisis, when they need to prove to distant relatives that a child is physically safe. I remembered Evelyn telling me about it. What I had not expected was how ordinary the background would look. Corinne's SUV was parked 30 feet behind Cole. I enlarged the image. The first time, I saw nothing. The second time, I noticed a distortion in the reflection along the passenger side front quarter. I enlarged it again until the pixels softened. There was damage. Not catastrophic. Nothing that would have made someone walking past the car stop and stare. But the metal near the front side looked pushed inward, and a long, pale scrape interrupted the dark paint. I sat at my kitchen table, with my phone inches from my face. Corinne's explanation came back immediately. She had told Evelyn she scraped a stone pillar while driving around in a panic looking for Nathan. I knew almost nothing about collision geometry. I was a librarian, not an accident reconstructionist. I could not look at one blurry family photograph and declare what had hit what. What I could say was simpler. The damage existed, and Evelyn had photographed it less than a day after Nathan vanished. I called her. This time, she answered. She sounded exhausted. I asked whether the image had been edited or cropped. She said no. It was the original photograph from her phone backup. She had spent 2 nights searching old cloud folders until she found it. I could hear what the search had cost her. My mother had not been hunting evidence against Corinne. She had been trying to prove herself wrong. She told me she had remembered the damage as smaller, maybe farther toward the bumper. Memory had blurred it over time. The photograph was the first objective thing she had seen from that morning. "What do you think it means?" I asked. "I don't know." For once, I believed her completely. She did not try to supply a harmless explanation. She did not accuse Corinne either. She simply said she no longer trusted herself to decide what it meant alone. That was progress. Not dramatic progress, but real. I made a copy of the original image and wrote down where it came from, when Evelyn believed she took it and why. I did not mark circles around the damage or build a presentation. I did not send it to every relative in our family and ask them to vote on whether my sister had lied. I contacted the investigator associated with Nathan's old missing person file. Getting from a photograph on my mother's phone to someone willing to revisit a nearly 2-year-old case was not instant. There were calls, transfers, and careful explanations. I gave my relationship to Nathan, explained that I was not reporting a new sighting or claiming to know how he disappeared, and said that several details in the family's recollection no longer matched the account we had accepted in 2024. Eventually, I spoke with someone who had access to the old file. I kept my language narrow. Corinne left the house after Nathan. She later said she stayed home. Her SUV showed fresh damage the following morning. A photograph existed. June independently remembered Corinne leaving. That was all I claimed. I never said, "My sister hit his car." I never said, "She tried to kill him." Even thinking those sentences made my stomach turn. There is a difference between suspecting someone you hate and suspecting someone you once shared a bedroom with. Corinne and I had fought over clothes as teenagers. I had held her bouquet at her wedding to Nathan in 2013. She had brought soup to my apartment when I had the flu. I had watched her fall asleep beside June's hospital crib after a childhood fever. Whatever she had become capable of later did not erase the fact that I knew hundreds of versions of her. That made the possibility worse, not easier. The investigator asked Evelyn to provide the original image through the proper channel, rather than relying on the copy I had saved. After that, the process moved beyond me. I hated that. I also knew it was exactly where it belonged. Days passed. Corinne's behavior became more controlled, rather than more explosive. She stopped arguing with me about Nathan altogether. If I mentioned the past, she redirected toward June's mental health, the wedding, or the residential program. It was as if the safest place for Corinne was always the future. June, meanwhile, had begun doing something new. She anticipated blame before anyone actually gave it. I saw it first in small moments. A glass rattled in the sink, and her shoulders tightened. Cole ran too fast across a room, and June called his name before any adult did. A wedding package arrived with one corner dented, and June looked at Corinne before the box had even been opened. Fear had trained her to arrive early. That realization sat heavily with me while the old file was being reviewed. Then, near the end of July, I received a call. The investigator did not give me confidential material wholesale. He did not invite me into the machinery of the case, or treat me like an amateur partner. What he told me was limited to matters relevant to the information I had supplied and questions he needed clarified. The old records showed Corinne had repaired the SUV shortly after Nathan disappeared. That fact alone was not shocking. She had said as much. But archived repair paperwork described damage that did not fit neatly with her story about scraping a stationary stone pillar. The invoice referenced bodywork along the front side area and noted paint transfer. The original shop estimate also had photographs. Those photographs still existed in archived business records. I closed my eyes when he told me. Something about the existence of those images made the whole thing feel colder. Not because photographs were magical proof. Because Corinne's car had carried a physical history the family story could not edit. The investigator was careful. Damage could happen in many ways. Paint transfer did not automatically identify another vehicle. A repair description from 2 years ago was not a confession. I understood. But the geometry that had bothered me in Evelyn's driveway picture bothered professionals enough to keep looking. The old crash documentation was reviewed again. Nathan's vehicle had been photographed extensively where investigators could access it after the recovery operation. At the time, the obvious story had been a single vehicle crash on a dangerous mountain road during severe weather. There had been scrape and impact damage on the body, but much of it could be explained by contact with terrain, vegetation, or the roadside structure during the descent. Now those same photographs were being read with a different question. Not, what did the car hit after it left the road? But, was there contact before it left the road? That distinction changed the meaning of old marks without changing the marks themselves. I remember standing beside my kitchen sink after the call, staring at nothing. For almost 2 years, We had treated Nathan's disappearance as a tragedy that began when his tires left pavement. Now there was the possibility that the tragedy had begun seconds earlier, with another vehicle. I did not tell June. Not yet. She needed fewer adult theories, not more. I did tell Evelyn that the photograph had been useful enough for investigators to review the file. My mother went silent. Then she said she had remembered something else. Not suddenly, exactly. More like a detail she had spent days trying not to give significance. The night Nathan disappeared, when Corinne finally returned home, her jeans had been muddy below the knees. There was mud along the hem and on one shoe. Her sleeve was torn near the cuff. Evelyn had noticed because she had helped Corinne change clothes before more relatives arrived. At the time, the explanation was obvious. Corinne had been searching. She had driven roads Nathan used. Maybe she had gotten out somewhere and walked along a shoulder. Maybe she had slipped. No one asked. Why would they? Her husband was missing. A muddy wife looked like a desperate wife. What color was the mud? I asked before realizing how absurd the question sounded. Evelyn gave a tired half laugh. Laurel, it was almost 2 years ago, mud-colored. Despite everything, I smiled. For 3 seconds, she was just my mother again. Then her voice changed. I washed those jeans. There was no evidence in the sentence, only guilt. She had washed her daughter's clothes because that was what mothers did when a family was falling apart. She had probably made coffee for search volunteers and collected towels and put children to bed. Now every ordinary act from that night threatened to become sinister in retrospect. I told her washing jeans did not make her responsible for anything Corinne might have done. She did not answer. The next development came from a statement that had been in the file all along. A motorist, traveling through the area around the relevant time, had reported seeing a dark SUV stopped near an overlook, not far from the location connected to Nathan's crash. In 2024, the statement had gone nowhere. Dark SUVs are not rare. Stopping on a mountain road during bad weather is not a crime. The witness had not provided a license plate and had not reported seeing a collision. There had been no reason then to connect it to Corinne. Now there was. Or at least there was a reason to ask. The family photograph, the repair records, Evelyn's memory, that Corinne left after Nathan, the muddy clothes, a dark SUV stopped near the overlook. Individually, each fact was weak enough to explain away. Together, they formed something more disturbing, precisely because no single piece arrived like a dramatic revelation. Real lies, I was beginning to understand, rarely collapse because someone discovers one perfect secret. They collapse when ordinary facts stop agreeing with one another. Through all of this, Corinne was still preparing for a wedding. That contrast became almost surreal. One afternoon in early August, Preston invited me to the mountain property to help with a small children's reading corner he wanted available during the reception. Several guests were bringing children, and he had remembered that I had once suggested having a quiet room away from the music. Corinne was there. So were June and Cole. I considered refusing, but Preston had invited me openly, and June's face changed when she saw my car. I went. The property was beautiful without trying to be a palace. Stone, timber, wide views over the Blue Ridge, a long terrace opening toward the ceremony lawn. Money was visible mostly in the absence of inconvenience. Staff appeared when needed. Deliveries arrived exactly when scheduled. Problems disappeared into someone else's hands. June sat at a table beneath the covered terrace with the astronomy atlas Preston had given her. For a while, I helped sort children's books while she turned pages beside me. Preston eventually joined us, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade, and, with the confidence of a man accustomed to knowing things, pointed at one of the star maps. He identified a constellation. Wrongly. June looked at the page, then at him. No. Preston leaned closer. He insisted. June corrected him again. He looked at me for support. I refused to save him. June traced the proper pattern with one finger and said, very calmly, "You own hotels, not the sky." Preston stared at her. Then he laughed. I laughed. June's eyes widened slightly, as though she had not expected the sentence to escape her mouth. Then she smiled too. Across the terrace, Corinne did not. The expression on her face lasted only a second. But Preston noticed. I saw that. He looked from June's smile to Corinne, and whatever he thought, he kept it to himself. The moment passed. Later, one of the smaller decor pieces, intended for the reception, could not be found. It was not valuable. Just a custom sign or framed card that had been moved between boxes during setup. A staff member asked whether anyone had seen it. June was standing beside me. Before Corinne said a word, June blurted, "I wasn't there." The sentence stopped the air around us. Nobody had accused her. Not yet. Corinne's face changed first. She said with exaggerated patience that nobody had said June touched anything. June looked confused by her own reaction. Preston did not. He watched her in a way I had seen school counselors watch children, when behavior answered a question before language did. Later he told me he had noticed similar moments before. June apologized for things no one had blamed her for yet. She watched adults' faces whenever something went wrong. She seemed relaxed with him or me, until Corinne entered the room, then became careful. He had believed Corinne when she described June as grief-fixated. Now he was beginning to wonder why grief looked so much like anticipation. I did not unload everything I knew. That would have been reckless, and some of it belonged to an active review. I did not fully understand myself. I told him only that June had spent a long time believing she caused bad things, and that adults around her needed to be careful not to reinforce it. Preston looked back toward the terrace. Corinne was speaking to a coordinator. June stood 3 feet away, absolutely still. "I thought she was afraid of losing her mother," he said. I watched June. So did I. The truth was worse. June was afraid of being the reason everyone else lost something. 2 days later, Evelyn found another memory inside the same night. Corinne had not called authorities immediately from the road. She had called from home. Again, that was not automatically criminal. People panic. People make bad decisions. People retrace routes before calling for help. But the timing mattered now. Nathan left. Corinne left 15 or 20 minutes later. A dark SUV was seen stop near the overlook. Corinne returned muddy, with a torn cuff. Only then did the official version solidify around a wife who had supposedly stayed home, worried, until her husband failed to return. I could feel my own thinking becoming dangerous. Once suspicion takes hold, every object begins volunteering to become proof. I resisted that. I wrote down what I knew. I separated it from what I feared. The same method I had taught June. What happened, what I controlled, what I didn't control. The irony was not lost on me. I needed the reality ledger as much as she did. The investigator called again on August 9. I remember the date because I had spent the morning preparing materials for the school year, which was approaching even though summer still pressed hot against the windows. I was labeling bins when my phone vibrated. I stepped into an empty office to answer. His tone was measured. No excitement, no accusation. That steadiness frightened me more than dramatic language would have. He explained that the re-examination was still ongoing. The records did not establish exactly what happened on the mountain road. They did not prove who drove any second vehicle or what the driver intended. But the old crash photographs, the repair documentation, and the witness information no longer supported treating every mark on Nathan's vehicle as part of an uncontested single-car event. There was now a legitimate reason to consider another possibility. I pressed my hand against the desk. For nearly 2 years, the question had been why Nathan lost control. Now the question was whether he had lost control at all. The investigator paused before giving me the only conclusion he was prepared to share. "There's enough here," he said, to look seriously at whether Nathan's car was struck by another vehicle before it went over the mountain. I closed my eyes. And suddenly, the worst question was no longer whether Corinne had lied. It was how far the lie went. The investigator's words changed the question, but they did not give me an answer. Nathan's car might have been struck by another vehicle before it went over the mountain. Might. That word became important. It was the difference between evidence and fear, between something an investigator could continue examining and something I could weaponize recklessly inside a family already cracking apart. I repeated it to myself whenever my imagination tried to outrun what we actually knew. Might. For several days after the call, I did not mention the possibility to June. I wanted to. Every time I pictured her standing behind Corinne's kitchen counter waiting to eat, every time I remembered her asking whether something would happen to me for defending her, I wanted to give her one clean sentence that would destroy the story she had been forced to carry. Your father did not disappear because you wished for him. Your mother's story is falling apart. You were never the bad thing in that house. But I still could not prove the first two statements completely, and the third would mean less if I turned it into another adult command. So I kept doing the hardest thing. I waited for truth to become truth. By the middle of August, the wedding had begun swallowing Corinne's calendar. August 29th was close enough that every day seemed attached to it by some invisible thread. Fittings, vendor calls, last-minute guest changes, transportation plans, menu changes, floral confirmations. Preston's mountain property had become the center of family movement, even though the ceremony was still nearly 2 weeks away. June seemed to move in the opposite direction. The closer the wedding came, the smaller she became inside conversations. When I saw her, she spoke less about the ceremony than everyone else did. She answered questions about her dress with shrugs. She let Corinne decide her shoes, her hair, and where she would stand in photographs. If someone asked whether she was excited, she studied their face first, as if trying to determine the safe answer. The astronomy atlas still traveled with her. She had not abandoned the sky. One afternoon, Evelyn brought her to the library, while Cole attended a birthday party with a classmate. The visit had been approved in advance, with Corinne reminding my mother twice that June had to be home by 5. We sat at one of the back tables where the air conditioning always ran too cold. June opened the atlas but did not look at it. She had been quieter than usual since arriving. I let 10 minutes pass before asking whether something had happened. She traced one finger along the edge of the page. Then she looked at me. "Do you think Mom lied about Dad?" There are questions adults can answer badly in opposite directions. I could have protected Corinne by saying I did not know anything. That would have been false. I could have protected my anger by saying yes. That would have gone beyond what I knew. So I told June the truth in the least dramatic way I could. I think some things we were told don't match what other people remember, or what some old records show. Her face tightened, so she lied. "I don't know yet exactly what happened." That's not the same answer. No. She looked disappointed in me. I accepted that. Being a safe adult could not mean always giving her the answer that relieved her fastest. I explained that memory could be imperfect and adults could misunderstand things, but that investigators were looking again at the crash because some facts deserved another look. June stared at the table. I asked what had made her bring it up. For a while, she said nothing. Then she told me another piece of the 21st of September 2024. Not the argument downstairs. After it, Nathan had come upstairs. June remembered being back in bed by then, pretending to sleep because children believe pretending can make adults stop noticing them. Her father entered quietly and sat beside her. The detail came slowly. His hand on the blanket, the hallway light behind him. His voice kept low because Cole was asleep farther down the hall. She could not remember everything he said, but she remembered one sentence. "None of this is because of you." I felt my throat close. June looked embarrassed. Not sad. Embarrassed, as though the memory itself were evidence against her. What did you think he meant? I asked. She stared at the atlas. That he knew. Knew what? That something bad was going to happen. She swallowed. That he knew I made everything worse. I had to grip the edge of the table. A father had apparently sat beside his 8-year-old daughter and told her she was not responsible. For almost 2 years, she had turned the sentence backward. Not because Nathan had failed to be clear, because everything Corinne said afterward taught June to reinterpret mercy as warning. I wanted to cry. I did not. June needed me more than my reaction needed space. Did he say you made anything happen? She shook her head. Did he say he was leaving because of you? Another shake. But Mom said... I know what Mom said. I kept my voice gentle. What I'm asking is what Dad said. June looked down. None of this is because of you. I nodded. That's what you remember. She sat with it. Not healed. Not convinced. But for once, she did not immediately argue with the memory. When Evelyn came to collect her, June slipped the atlas into her bag. The torn ledger page still rested somewhere between its star maps. I watched her leave and thought about the residential program. Something about the timing had begun bothering me. Corinne had first mentioned it vaguely, when June's questions became more specific. Then, as June remembered the argument and wrote that Corinne left after Nathan, the idea became a plan. Now that investigators had begun revisiting the crash, Corinne's language had changed again. Not someday, not maybe after the wedding. Soon I learned how soon 3 days later. Preston called me. That alone was unusual enough that I stepped outside the library before answering. He did not sound angry. He sounded confused. He told me Corinne had begun pressing him to help finalize June's placement almost immediately after the honeymoon. The application materials were largely completed. Transportation options had been discussed. Corinne wanted to use some of his administrative resources to move the process faster. I stopped walking. How fast? Preston said that was what bothered him. A month earlier, Corinne had described the residential program as something they might consider if June remained distressed after the wedding. Now she wanted June ready to leave within days of the ceremony. The timeline felt less like treatment planning and more like evacuation. I asked whether he knew why the urgency had changed. He repeated what Corinne had told him. June's fixation on Nathan was getting worse. Outside interference had destabilized her, and the renewed questions about the crash proved the child needed distance from people encouraging her obsession. Outside interference. That meant me. Possibly Evelyn now, too. I leaned against the brick wall of the library and watched cars move through the parking lot. For weeks I had assumed Corinne wanted June gone, because June did not fit the polished family she imagined building with Preston. That explanation was cruel enough, but the calendar told a harder story. Before June's memories sharpened, the program was something Corinne might consider after the wedding. After June wrote Mom left after Dad, the plan became concrete. Once investigators began asking about the crash, Corinne wanted the paperwork accelerated so June could leave within days of the ceremony. I could not know what Corinne was thinking, but I could see when she reached hardest for the language of bad luck and instability, when June got close to a fact. What had begun as one vicious sentence during grief had become useful. The more June distrusted herself, the less likely she was to challenge the story around Nathan. Sending her away would not erase what she remembered. It would separate her from the adults helping her trust that the memory was hers. I did not say that to Preston. He still did not know what investigators were reviewing, and I was not going to pull him into speculation because he happened to be marrying my sister. I asked what he intended to do about the program. His answer surprised me. He was not going to pay to accelerate it. He had told Corinne that sending a 10-year-old away days after a wedding sounded destabilizing, not therapeutic, and that if June truly needed residential care, the decision should come from a careful clinical process, rather than the convenience of a family schedule. Corinne had not taken that well. Preston did not repeat their argument line by line. He only said she accused him of allowing me to get into his head. I almost smiled despite the situation. I had spent weeks assuming Preston's money might make Corinne harder to challenge. Instead, at least in that moment, his money had become one thing she could no longer use automatically. He went quiet before adding something else. I kept you on the wedding list. I thought I had misheard. He explained that Corinne had considered removing me from the invitation after the DSS involvement. Preston refused. He had noticed June was calmer when I was present, and he did not want the child spending the wedding day without one adult she clearly trusted. Until that moment, I had thought my invitation survived because Corinne did not want to explain my absence to extended family. That was apparently only part of it. Preston had begun doubting her before I realized he had. Not the crash, not crime. Her handling of June. He told me he had initially believed Corinne completely when she described June as grief-fixated and emotionally volatile, but the girl he saw rarely demanded attention. She avoided it. She apologized early. She watched for blame. Those observations had started refusing to fit the description he had been given. I did not tell him he was right about everything. I told him only that June needed adults who reacted to what they actually saw. After we hung up, I stood outside for another minute. Something in the family had shifted again. Corinne still held the most direct power over June, but she no longer controlled every adult around her. Evelyn was questioning. Preston was questioning. Cole had begun returning his own blame, and June had begun writing memories down before anyone told her what they should mean. Maybe that was why Corinne was in such a hurry. 3 days later, Evelyn called me from the mountain property. Corinne had taken the children there for another stretch of wedding preparation, and my mother was helping with them during appointments. I heard strain in her voice immediately. She said Corinne had told June the program was practically decided. June had gone pale. Then Corinne told her there was nothing to fear because, sometimes, distance is what heals a family. I closed my eyes. There it was again. The child as wound. The child as infection. The child as the thing that had to be removed so the rest of the body could recover. I asked to speak with June. Evelyn hesitated, then gave her the phone. June did not say hello at first. I could hear outdoor sounds in the background. Wind. Maybe someone moving chairs across stone. They want me to go right after the wedding. I told her I knew the plan had accelerated. Is it because of Dad? I did not know. I don't know. Is it because I remembered? I don't know that either. She exhaled sharply. For the first time, she sounded angry with me rather than afraid. You never know. The sentence hurt. It was also healthy in a strange way. June was beginning to want answers badly enough to resent adults who could not provide them. I know, I said. She was silent. I wish I knew more. Another pause. Then she whispered, Maybe Mom's right. About what? That I make everything worse. I looked across the empty library office. She continued before I could answer. The family had fought more since she started remembering. Evelyn and Corinne were strained. Preston had argued with Corinne about the program. I had called people. Investigators were asking questions. In June's mind, the pattern had returned. She remembered. Adults fought. Therefore, memory was dangerous. I wanted to rip the belief out by force. Instead, I asked whether the adults had choices in those situations. Yes. Did you make Preston disagree with Mom? No. Did you make Grandma remember something? No. Did you make me call anyone? A longer pause. No. Then adults are responsible for what adults choose to do with the truth. She did not answer. But she stayed on the phone. That was enough. Afterward, Evelyn told me Corinne intended to move the children to Preston's mountain property earlier than originally planned. She said it would simplify the final wedding week. I understood what it would really do. Reduce access. Control environment. Limit unscheduled conversations. Corinne did not need to lock June in a room. She only needed to place her somewhere every adult encounter passed through wedding logistics and her permission. The countdown suddenly felt shorter. Then, on August 20th, the investigator called. I was at home when the number appeared. My first thought was that they had found something else in the crash records. I was wrong. He told me a social worker at a neurorehabilitation facility in Tennessee had contacted authorities after searching missing person information connected to a long-term patient. For several seconds, I did not understand the sentence. The investigator had to repeat the essential part more slowly. The facility had cared for a man with severe neurological injuries and incomplete identity information. Over months of rehabilitation, his language and autobiographical memory had improved in fragments. Recently, certain fragments had begun repeating often enough to search meaningfully. June, Cole, Asheville, Keller, a mountain road. My hand went numb around the phone. I sat down on the edge of my couch. The investigator did not say Nathan was alive. Not yet. He said the patient's recovered details overlapped strongly enough with Nathan Keller's missing person information that they were pursuing verification. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I asked the obvious question. Is it him? We don't know yet. I almost laughed from the cruelty of the answer. For nearly 2 years, our family had lived in the space between missing and dead. Now, with one phone call, I was back inside that space. I asked whether Corinne knew. No. The investigator told me not to contact her about it. They needed to verify the man before the family was told anything that could not be taken back. I understood. I hated that I understood. I thought of June, 10 years old. Her father legally declared dead. A blue notebook full of disasters she believed she caused. How could I look at her and say nothing? But what would be worse? Keeping a possibility from her for a few days? Or telling a child her father might be alive, only to discover the injured man was someone else? I agreed to wait. That night I barely slept. Every memory of Nathan returned with unnatural clarity. His laugh, the way he leaned against a doorway rather than sitting down during conversations. The ridiculous pancakes he used to make when the children were small. His voice in the voicemail he left me before the crash, asking whether the kids could stay somewhere else if things became too loud. By sunrise, I had built entire futures from a man whose identity had not even been confirmed. I forced myself to stop. Might? Again, the same word. The next 3 days were among the longest I could remember. Corinne moved June and Cole to Preston's property early, exactly as planned. She framed it as convenience. The children would adjust to the venue, clothes, and schedule. Evelyn was allowed in and out because Corinne needed help. My access narrowed almost completely. Preston sent me one brief message confirming I was still invited to the wedding and that June had asked whether I was coming. I replied yes. Nothing more. I did not tell him about Tennessee. I did not tell Evelyn. I did not tell June. The secret felt like carrying a lit match through dry grass. On August 22nd, June called me using Evelyn's phone. She asked whether I had learned anything about Nathan. The question nearly broke my discipline. I could have said no. That would have been a lie. I could have said maybe. That would have been hope without foundation. So I told her there were still people checking information, and that I would tell her the truth as soon as I knew something I could trust. She became quiet. Do you think he knew I loved him? My eyes burned. Yes. That answer I could give without hesitation. Even if he was mad? Yes. She said nothing for a while. Then, I remember what he said. None of this is because of you. Yes. I waited. June whispered the sentence once more. This time not as an accusation against herself. Almost like she was testing whether the words could survive outside Corinne's interpretation. When the call ended, I sat alone in the dark. I wanted Nathan alive so badly I no longer trusted my own hope. The investigator called the following evening. August 23rd. I had been carrying my phone from room to room for hours, pretending I was not waiting. When it rang, I answered before the second vibration. His voice was careful, but different. There was weight behind it now. "We may have found Nathan Keller." My knees weakened. I gripped the back of a dining chair. Before I could ask anything, he continued, "Do not contact Corinne. We need to verify the man before we tell the children anything." The investigator called me again the morning of August 24th. I had not slept enough to call what I had done the night before rest. I had drifted in and out with my phone on the pillow beside me, waking every hour to the same impossible sentence. "We may have found Nathan Keller." By 7:30 I was dressed, though I had nowhere to go. I stood at my kitchen counter drinking coffee. I could not taste, and watching sunlight move across the floor while trying not to imagine June hearing the words, "Your father is alive." The investigator did not begin there. He began with caution. The man in Tennessee had survived a severe trauma nearly 2 years earlier. What staff at the rehabilitation facility knew about his early history was incomplete, because he had arrived without reliable identification, without a phone, without a wallet, and with injuries that made self-report nearly impossible. The circumstances of how he entered the medical system had been reconstructed later from hospital and transport records, rather than from anything the man himself had been capable of explaining. After the September storm, emergency crews farther west had found him near a swollen waterway outside the area where the North Carolina search had concentrated. Investigators later believed storm runoff and the steep drainage corridor had carried him well beyond the original search zone and into a Tennessee response chain. With no wallet or phone, no one immediately connected the unidentified trauma patient with a missing husband from Asheville. His condition had done the rest. Severe head trauma, periods of reduced consciousness, aphasia, memory loss so profound that he could not reliably give a name, address, or family history. Even after he became medically stable, speaking did not mean remembering. The investigator told me that Nathan, or the man they believed might be, Nathan had spent months recovering basic communication, while large portions of his autobiographical memory remained inaccessible. By the time he moved into long-term neurorehabilitation, staff had a provisional identity record built around an unidentified adult male, not a complete life waiting to be looked up. I sat at my kitchen table gripping the coffee mug with both hands. Every explanation closed one hole and opened another. How could nobody know for almost 2 years? The investigator explained that a missing person bulletin in one jurisdiction and a neurologically impaired unidentified patient elsewhere did not automatically meet, especially when the patient could not supply a usable name or history. Nathan had not spent 23 months consciously wondering why nobody called home. For much of that time, there had been no coherent home inside his memory to name. Late in 2025, fragments began repeating during therapy. June, Cole, Keller, Asheville, a mountain road, a child looking at stars. At first, they were too unstable to mean much. By May and June 2026, enough of them survived repetition for the rehabilitation social worker to make a targeted missing person search. That was what finally put Nathan Keller's file on the same screen. I asked whether they had confirmed him. "Not yet," the investigator said. The answer cut through me. They were checking medical history, old records, distinguishing physical features and family details the man could not have learned from a public bulletin. I confirmed ordinary things. 2 fingers Nathan had broken in college, a surgical scar near one knee, an antibiotic allergy, old stitches near his hairline. There was no single miraculous reveal. His identity was rebuilt from small facts fitting where they belonged. By that afternoon, I was asked to come to a secure location connected to the investigation. The drive felt unreal. I kept expecting a call saying they were wrong. And for one guilty second, I almost wanted the grief we already understood, instead of a truth that would force us to touch the last 2 years all over again. I was taken into a quiet room and told there would be no surprise reunion. The man had already been informed that someone from the Keller family might come. Staff were monitoring his fatigue. The investigator reminded me that traumatic brain injury could affect pace, memory, and emotional regulation. I nodded through all of it. Then the door opened. The man who walked in did not look like the Nathan I had buried in my mind. He was thinner. One side of his face carried a scar that pulled faintly near the temple. His hair was shorter than I remembered, and more gray had appeared near the sides. His left leg did not move quite as freely as the right. Every few steps he seemed to make a tiny correction, as if walking still required a small amount of thought. I stood. He looked at me. For perhaps 3 seconds, neither of us knew what the other person needed. Then his mouth moved. Laurel. It was my name. Not guessed. Not asked. Mine. I covered my mouth. He sat before I did. The movement looked practiced, careful. His breathing became shallow after the short walk. I wanted to cross the room and hug him, but suddenly, even affection seemed like something that required permission. He solved it by holding out his hand. I took it. His grip was weaker than I remembered, but it was Nathan's hand. I knew that before any official later told me the verification was complete. There are things the law must establish one way, and the body recognizes another. I cried without making any sound. Nathan watched me, confused by my reaction for a second, then understanding arrived slowly across his face. How long? His speech was clear but deliberate. Some words seemed to require selection. I told him. Almost 2 years. He closed his eyes. I watched the number hurt him. When he opened them again, the first question he asked was not about Corinne, not about the crash. How are June and Cole? That was when whatever control I had left broke. I bent forward with my face in my hands. Nathan waited. He did not ask again. He seemed to understand that the answer was coming, whether I wanted it to or not. I told him the children were alive. June was 10, Cole was 7. They had grown. They were physically safe. Then I had to decide how much truth belonged in that first hour. I started with the simplest things. Cole had become obsessed with drawing impossible machines and losing shoes. Nathan smiled weakly. June still loved the sky. Something changed in his face. Stars. Yes. He looked at the wall as though trying to reach something behind it. For several seconds I thought the memory was gone. Then he said, "Pancakes." I stared at him. He made a vague circle with one hand. Bad pancakes. A sound escaped me somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Nathan's Sunday pancakes had been legendary for the wrong reasons. He could build a deck, change a tire, and repair almost anything mechanical, but he had never managed to make 2 pancakes the same shape. June had named them when she was little. Meteorites, I said. Nathan looked at me. His smile came slowly. She called them meteorites. I laughed. Really laughed. My face was wet and my chest hurt, but the absurdity of the memory cracked the room open. 2 years of hospitals, unidentified records, police files, legal death decrees, and family grief. And what made Nathan unmistakably Nathan in that moment was a child insulting his pancakes. The laugh exhausted him. That frightened me. He leaned back, eyes closed for several seconds, and one of the people assisting with the meeting asked whether he needed a break. Nathan nodded. The physical limits were impossible to ignore. This was not a man stepping out of the past intact. He had survived. That was different from being restored. When we resumed later, the investigator had already confirmed enough of the identity process that I was no longer being asked to treat the man in front of me as a possibility. Nathan Keller was alive. Legally, that truth would create its own complicated corrections later. Emotionally, it was much simpler. June's father had not died on September 21st, 2024, and June did not know. I hated every minute that followed in which I knew and she did not. But there were reasons for that delay beyond investigation now. Nathan needed to understand what he was returning to. I had brought photographs of the children, nothing more at first. Recent ones, June at the library, Cole outside Evelyn's house. I watched Nathan study the changes in their faces, as if the missing years existed physically inside the pixels. He touched June's picture with one finger. She thinks I left? I did not answer immediately. Then I took out photographs I had made of several pages from the reality ledger with June's permission, before access had become tighter. I did not have the notebook itself. June still controlled that, Nathan read slowly. Cole broke it. Whether I was in the living room. Then one page about Nathan. The wording was less complete than what June would later write, but the belief was there. Dad left angry. I wished for him to stay home. Dad disappeared. Maybe I made him go. Nathan stopped reading. His hand began trembling. For a moment, I thought the physical strain had become too much. Then he pressed the pages flat against the table. She thinks this because of me. I told him no, that was too quick. He looked at me sharply. I waited too long. The sentence surprised me. He remembered enough of the family before the crash to understand his own part in it. Not what happened on the road yet, what happened in the house. He remembered Corinne being harder on June because she was older, questioned unfairness, and was expected to absorb Cole's mistakes. Nathan had intervened sometimes, and excused too much at others. Corinne was tired, Cole was younger, the marriage was stressed. The bad luck language came after he disappeared, but he recognized the ground it had grown from when I told him about the eating last punishment. Cole's mistakes landing on June, and her new fear of wanting anything good. Nathan's face seemed to collapse inward. He stared at the ledger pages again. Then he found the sentence June remembered him saying on the night he left. None of this is because of you. His eyes shut. I remember that. I did not breathe, not because I expected a complete recovered scene. Nothing about his memory worked that neatly. He spoke in pieces. The house, June upstairs, Corinne angry, Cole asleep. A decision he had delayed too long. He remembered telling Corinne the pattern with June had to stop. Not the phrase bad luck that did not exist yet, but the constant blame, the way every conflict somehow became June's fault. Corinne accused him of undermining her. Nathan said the children needed to spend a few days somewhere else, while they figured out what came next. Evelyn's, he thought. Maybe mine. He was not certain which name he said first. That uncertainty made me trust the memory more, not less. He did not pretend to know what he did not know. Then Nathan looked directly at me. I told her none of it was because of her, because I was finally trying to stop what was happening to her. For almost 2 years, June had turned her father's last tenderness into proof that she had doomed him. It meant the opposite. Nathan had gone upstairs because he knew she had heard the argument and wanted her to understand that the adult's choices were not hers. He drove away because he had finally decided something inside the house had to change. Nathan was crying now, quietly. No dramatic collapse, just tears moving down a face that had changed while his children grew up without him. I should have done it sooner, he said. I did not absolve him. He did not ask me to. Love did not require us to erase the years before the crash. Nathan had loved June. Nathan had also kept the peace too long. Both things could be true. The investigator waited until Nathan had rested again before discussing the road. I stayed because Nathan asked me to, and because some of what he remembered overlapped facts I had already supplied. His memory came less like a story than broken photographs. Driving, his phone ringing repeatedly, Corinne's name on the screen, rain, headlights behind him, a narrow stretch of road, her SUV coming close in his side mirror after he refused to stop, then the vehicle turning into the rear side area of his car. In Nathan's memory, the movement was deliberate, an attempt to force him to stop, the shove through the steering wheel in his hands, and the road disappeared where road should have been. After that, everything became unstable. Trees, glass, pressure, cold, darkness. He could not provide the sequence. The investigator did not ask him to. Nathan stopped several times because the effort of remembering caused visible fatigue. His speech slowed. Once he lost a word and became furious with himself until the specialist with him redirected him. The most important fragment came near the end. Headlights above, not moving. A vehicle had stopped on the road. Nathan remembered trying to breathe, trying to call. Footsteps somewhere above or near him. Then Corinne. He was not certain whether he saw her face clearly. He remembered her voice. He remembered saying her name. He remembered asking for help. His hand moved toward his wrist as he searched for the next fragment. A faint metallic sound. A bracelet, maybe. Corinne had worn bracelets constantly back then, thin metal bangles that announced her hands before she entered a room. Nathan remembered that sound. Then footsteps moving away, headlights disappearing. Nothing after that with enough clarity to trust. The room felt colder. I did not ask the obvious question. The investigator did. Are you saying Corinne knew you were alive? Nathan looked exhausted. I think she heard me. That was all. Not certainty. Not a courtroom declaration. A memory. But unlike before, the memory did not stand alone. Over the next 2 days, investigators tested Nathan's fragments against records and statements that existed before anyone knew he was alive. The motorist's dark SUV report, the driveway, and repair photographs, Evelyn's timeline, and description of Corinne's muddy clothes and torn cuff, the delayed call from home, the old crash images, and June's pre-investigation line Mom left after Dad. Some details remained uncertain, but enough matched independently that Nathan's damaged memory was no longer standing alone. The investigator told me the case had moved beyond a family suspicion. There was sufficient corroboration to seek criminal process. I did not ask what charges. I did not need labels yet. I needed June safe. By August 27th, Nathan understood that Corinne was getting married in 2 days. The news struck him strangely. He did not react like a jealous husband returning to reclaim a wife. His first concern was the legal absurdity. I explained that the court had declared him dead in March, after nearly 18 months of searches and the evidence surrounding the crash. Corinne had relied on that decree for the wedding paperwork. Nathan stared at the floor. I'm legally dead. For the moment, on paper, that produced the faintest expression of disbelief, almost humor. Then it vanished. The kids think I'm dead. That was what mattered to him. Authorities did not want Nathan appearing at Corinne's front door. Neither did I. He was physically vulnerable, emotionally overwhelmed, and central to an emerging criminal case. June also deserved better than to have her father resurrect himself by knocking on a house where she had spent 2 years being taught his death belonged to her. A controlled plan began taking shape. The wedding created an obvious complication and, in some ways, an opportunity. Everyone's location would be known. The mountain property had private areas away from guests. Nathan could stay nearby with appropriate support while officers approached Corinne separately. The intention was not to stage a spectacle. Quite the opposite. Corinne was to be approached in a controlled way. The children could then be told about Nathan safely. I remember thinking how absurd that sounded beside the reality of our family. Safely. There was no safe way to tell a 10-year-old her dead father had been alive while she spent 2 years blaming herself. There were only less harmful ways. Late on August 28th, I received confirmation that a judicial official had issued an arrest warrant on probable cause. By then, Corinne and the children were already staying behind the gates of Preston's mountain property. Rather than force an overnight entry into the house with June and Cole beside her, officers planned to approach the next day, during a controlled window, when the children would already be with Evelyn and Corinne, could be separated from them and from a vehicle. The warrant did not make me triumphant. Corinne was still my sister. and probable cause was not a conviction. Authorities arranged for Nathan to remain out of sight near the property in a guest house, service area with a victim advocate, while officers staged lower on the mountain road. The plan was to arrest Corinne quietly, then handle the children's reunion with their father away from the guests. Nathan agreed. He hated waiting, but he agreed. He understood now that protecting June could not mean charging into her life simply because he finally had the ability to walk back into it. That was perhaps the first test of the father he wanted to become again. Late that evening, before we separated, Nathan asked whether June still had the atlas. I said yes. She still looks up? Sometimes. His eyes lowered. Good. I thought of telling him about Kevin. The star that looked like a Kevin for reasons no astronomer would ever explain. I saved it. There would be time for ordinary stories if we got through the next day. At least I hoped there would. Wedding morning arrived bright and clear. August 29th. I woke before 6. For several seconds I forgot why my chest hurt. Then everything returned at once. Corinne, June, Nathan, the warrant, the ceremony. I dressed slowly. My phone stayed on the bathroom counter where I could see it reflected in the mirror. At 7:12, the investigator messaged. The warrant team was staged near the lower entrance to Preston's mountain property. Nathan was already nearby, out of sight, with support. The plan remained to keep everything controlled. I read the message twice. Truth was less than a mile from June now, maybe only a few hundred yards once we reached the property. Her father was alive. Her mother did not know he had been found. Police were waiting below a wedding where Corinne planned to begin a new family, while the old one stood on the edge of returning. Then a second message appeared. Evelyn. I opened it. June says she has a feeling something bad will happen because she's excited. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand. After everything we had uncovered, after every contradiction and every page in the ledger, June still believed joy created a debt. And that morning, the truth that could finally free her from that belief was already waiting on the mountain. By 10 that morning, the mountain looked too beautiful for what was waiting on it. Preston's property sat high enough above Asheville that the distant ridges layered themselves into shades of blue, each one softer than the last. The sky was almost offensively clear. No storm clouds, no wind strong enough to disturb the flowers. Nothing in the landscape suggested that a man declared dead was waiting somewhere out of sight, that an arrest warrant existed below the property, or that the bride fastening pearl earrings upstairs had spent nearly 2 years teaching her daughter that disasters followed happiness. I drove through the main entrance with both hands tight on the steering wheel. The investigator's message from that morning remained on my phone. The warrant team was nearby. Nathan was nearby. Neither fact was mine to reveal. That restriction made every ordinary wedding detail feel unreal. A staff member checked my name against the guest list. Another directed me toward parking. Someone carried trays through a side entrance. Musicians tested a few notes beneath the covered terrace. I heard laughter near the house. My name had not disappeared from the list. Preston had made sure of that. I understood the significance only after everything that had happened in the previous weeks. Corinne could have excluded me without much difficulty. She had every reason to want the person who challenged her version of June far away from the wedding. Instead, I was there because Preston had already made a quiet decision of his own. He did not know everything. He did not need to. He had seen enough. I found June before I found Corinne. She stood on the terrace in a pale dress that reached just below her knees, while a woman adjusted a small ribbon at her waist. Her hair had been pinned back more carefully than I had ever seen it. She looked beautiful in the way children often do when adults have spent too much time arranging them, and completely uncomfortable. Cole stood nearby in dress pants, trying to pull one sock higher without anyone noticing. June saw me. Her whole body changed. Not dramatically. Her shoulders dropped perhaps half an inch. Her mouth softened. But I had spent all summer watching the difference between June braced for impact and June believing she had one safe adult nearby. The change was enough. She walked toward me until Corinne called her back for photographs. I stopped where I was. That was part of my job now, too. Not forcing June to choose between me and her mother every time we occupied the same space. Corinne appeared near the terrace doors in a silk robe, with her wedding hair already done. She looked composed enough that for one irrational second, I wondered whether I had dreamed every conversation of the previous 2 months. Then her eyes found mine. The warmth left her face. Only for me. She recovered before anyone else could notice. "Laurel," I greeted her. Nothing more. No mention of Nathan. No mention of the warrant. I could not imagine a stranger looking at my sister that morning and seeing what I knew. That frightened me. Corinne was not sweating through makeup or pacing like a woman with a secret. She checked schedules. She thanked staff. She straightened Cole's collar. When he complained that it felt like it was trying to strangle him, she loosened it with an almost affectionate smile. There were parts of her motherhood that were real. That had always been one of the hardest things to hold in my mind. She loved Cole. She had loved June too, in whatever damaged form remained beneath control and blame. People did not become harmless merely because some of their tenderness was genuine. The photographer called for the children. Preston joined them wearing trousers and a white shirt before changing into his jacket. He rested one hand lightly behind Cole's shoulder and waited while June was positioned on Corinne's other side. "Closer," Corinne told her. June moved. "Smile like you're happy for once." The photographer's expression flickered, then vanished behind professionalism. June smiled. It was perfect. Too perfect. Her cheeks lifted. Her teeth showed. Her body remained stiff. The shutter clicked. Again. Again. A future family captured in a dozen polished fractions of a second. I stood 20 feet away and thought about the boarding school paperwork Corinne wanted ready almost immediately after the honeymoon. That was the contradiction reduced to one image. June was necessary inside the photograph. She was inconvenient inside the life the photograph advertised. When the photographer moved on to another arrangement, Corinne quietly reminded one of the staff members that June should remain close to Evelyn throughout the ceremony and reception. She used the word episodes. If June became overwhelmed, Corinne said, she should be moved somewhere quiet before she disrupted anything. The staff member nodded as if this were a routine instruction about a nervous child. June heard it. I could tell because her fake smile disappeared. 10 minutes earlier, Corinne had pulled her closer because she belonged in the family picture. Now she was being managed like weather. I walked over only when Corinne left to finish dressing. June looked toward the house first, then at me. "You came." "Of course." Her fingers worried the seam of her dress. I wanted to tell her that her father was less than a mile away. Maybe less than that. Instead, I asked if the shoes hurt. She looked down. "A little." That was safe enough to answer honestly. I told her I had never understood why important occasions required women to suffer through footwear. June's mouth twitched. Then Cole ran past us and declared that his shoes were worse because his had laces. Normal sibling injustice. For a few moments, that was all we dealt with. Guests began arriving around noon. The property filled gradually, rather than all at once. Extended family. Business friends of Preston's. Neighbors. People from Corinne's reconstructed life who knew Nathan mostly as a tragedy that had happened before they met her. I heard the phrase brave widow more than once. Each time something inside me tightened. But I did not correct strangers on the lawn. The truth already had somewhere official to go. I did not need to make the wedding my courtroom. Near the ceremony entrance sat a large guest book beside a small sign, inviting everyone to leave a wish for the couple. I saw June notice it. She stopped. Cole had already written something with enormous letters that used nearly half a page. Evelyn told him gently that other guests might need space. June picked up the pen. She stared at the blank line. I stood beside her but did not read over her shoulder. After a while, she set the pen down. You don't want to write one? She shook her head. I don't make wishes anymore. I had heard versions of that sentence all summer. This time it hurt differently. We were standing at a wedding, surrounded by people publicly wishing for love, health, happiness, and long life, as if wanting good things were the most natural act in the world. For June, wanting remained dangerous. I looked toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond the visible terrace, Nathan was waiting. If I believed in cosmic symbolism, I might have called that meaningful. But I had spent months teaching June not to confuse coincidence with cause. So I resisted the temptation. Her father was there because people had searched, remembered, verified, and acted, not because the universe had decided to reward her. By early afternoon, the atmosphere shifted from preparation to ceremony. Guests took their seats gradually. Staff moved final pieces into place. I was standing near Evelyn when a decorative wooden frame at the end of one aisle tipped sideways. It struck the grass rather than stone, but the sound was sharp enough to draw several heads. Cole froze beside it. June stood 6 feet away. I saw the old pattern begin before Corinne even turned. June's shoulders tightened, her mouth opened, but Cole got there first. She didn't do it, I did. The words carried farther than he intended. Several nearby guests looked over. Cole's face turned red. He pointed at the frame. He had been trying to straighten a ribbon, caught the edge, and knocked it down. Corinne stopped. For 1 second, the woman preparing to greet 100 guests disappeared. Her face hardened toward him. Not June. Cole, because he had broken the rule that had kept him safe. Then the wedding mask returned. She told him accidents happened and instructed a staff member to fix the frame. That was all. No public scene, no punishment. But Cole looked at June after Corinne walked away. This time he did not look relieved that blame had found someone else. He looked frightened by what he had done, and proud of it at the same time. June reached over and squeezed his hand. I thought of his crooked vase drawing. The little boy who had once watched blame roll toward his sister had finally stepped in front of it where other people could hear him. He was 7. It should never have required courage to say he had knocked over a frame. In our family, it did. Evelyn had watched the whole thing. After the children went toward the house, she moved beside me and said she had already given investigators her full memory. The timeline, the SUV, the mud and torn cuff, the delayed call, and would repeat it under oath if asked. You're sure? Her eyes moved toward the house where Corinne was getting dressed. I'm sure I'll tell the truth. There was no victory in that sentence. My mother was preparing to give evidence that might help imprison her daughter, but she had finally stopped editing memory to protect the person it might hurt. The fuller apology for that choice would come later. That morning, telling the truth was enough. An hour before the ceremony, Preston found me near the side garden. He was fully dressed now. Dark suit, tie, the controlled polish of a man who had probably spent years walking into rooms where people expected him to know what to do. That confidence was thinner today. He asked if June had spoken to me. I said a little. Then he told me he had made a decision about the residential program. Again, he did not know the full criminal investigation. He knew only enough about June. He had told Corinne that morning that his money, staff, and company resources would not be used to expedite the placement after the wedding. If a qualified professional later concluded June required residential care, that was something to evaluate properly. But she would not be sent away simply because the household wanted an easier beginning. I felt something loosen in my chest. How did Corinne take it? Preston looked toward the house. That's probably not a story for a wedding day. Under different circumstances, I might have smiled. Instead, I understood what his restraint meant. Corinne had reacted badly, but Preston had not changed his decision. He was not rescuing June. He was removing one tool Corinne had expected to control. The placement could still become a fight later. Corinne was still June's mother. But the plan was no longer sliding forward on Preston's resources and unquestioned agreement. One pillar had disappeared. Preston looked down at his watch. Then he said something I had not expected. I kept thinking maybe after today everything would settle. I understood. He had believed the wedding would create stability. A new household, a new rhythm, maybe even relief for June. Now he could see that Corinne had been using the wedding as a finish line for problems marriage itself could not solve. I did not tell him that the greatest problem in his future marriage was waiting elsewhere on his own property. I only said, "A ceremony can't fix what people refuse to name." He nodded. Then someone called for him, and he went. That was the moment my fear shifted. For weeks I had imagined the wedding as the point after which Corinne would have Preston's household, his resources, the boarding plan, and greater control over access. Standing there, I realized that future was already coming apart. Cole had spoken, Evelyn had given investigators everything, Preston had refused the program, and I was still there. Somewhere beyond the main house, Nathan was alive. For the first time that day, I believed the warrant might be handled quietly. The children moved somewhere safe, and Nathan introduced to them afterward without the ceremony becoming a battlefield. The relief was real, because I did not know what was about to happen. Near the ceremony lawn, June stood alone for a moment, watching guests take their seats. I went to her. She looked toward Corinne, now moving through the terrace entrance in her wedding dress. My sister was beautiful. There was no point pretending otherwise. June stared at her mother with an expression I could not name. Love was in it. Fear, too. Children do not stop loving parents simply because those parents hurt them. That is one of the cruelest facts adults forget. "You okay?" I asked. June nodded, then shook her head. "I'm excited." The confession seemed to embarrass her. I waited, her fingers wrapped around mine. "That's bad." "No. You don't know. I know being excited isn't bad." She looked across the lawn. "I got excited about the stars. Then Dad died. The old equation. I got excited about ice cream and it stormed. But we knew the storm was coming before the ice cream." "I know." She sounded frustrated because facts and fear were no longer agreeing. That was progress, though it did not feel like it to her. "I'm excited today," she whispered. "What if something happens?" I crouched slightly so I did not have to speak down to her. The words I chose mattered more than reassurance. "Whatever happens today, your happiness does not cause accidents. Adults are responsible for adult choices." June studied my face. Not a promise that nothing bad would happen. I could not make that promise. Something was going to happen. But whatever happened, it would not be because she had dared to feel happy. Her grip on my hand loosened. She took one breath, then another. Across the lawn, the musicians settled into place. Guests were nearly seated. Preston stood near the front, speaking quietly with the officiant. Corinne remained inside for the final few minutes before the ceremony. Evelyn came to stand near Cole. For one strange moment, I saw the entire family, not as fixed roles but as people standing in different places than they had 2 months earlier. Cole no longer needed June to absorb every mistake. Evelyn no longer needed silence to prove she loved her daughter. Preston no longer believed supporting Corinne meant agreeing with her about June. I no longer believed staying close was enough if closeness required silence. And June was frightened, but she was still there. She had not volunteered to disappear. The ceremony coordinator signaled that we should take our places. June remained beside me another second. Then something made me look toward the rear of the ceremony area. Not a sound. Movement. Beyond the final row of chairs, a path curved toward the guest house and service buildings partly hidden by trees. Someone had stepped into view. A man. Thin. One shoulder slightly lower than the other. His left leg moving with that careful, uneven correction I had watched in the secure room days earlier. A scar caught the afternoon light near his temple. Beside him stood the victim advocate. My breath stopped. I learned later that, once officers confirmed the children were with Evelyn near the ceremony area, the victim advocate was instructed to move Nathan from the guest house to the designated rear waiting point for a reunion after Corinne was approached. The service path between those two places crossed one narrow opening behind the final row of chairs. Nathan had not abandoned the plan. The route simply exposed him for a few seconds before anyone expected June to be looking that way. All I knew in that moment was that he was there beyond the last row of chairs, alive. I must have changed somehow, because June felt it through my hand. She turned her head. Her eyes followed mine toward the path. She saw the scarred man standing beneath the trees, and June went utterly still. For several seconds, June did not breathe. At least that was how it looked from beside her. Her fingers had gone rigid around mine. Every sound on the ceremony lawn seemed to move farther away, the low conversation of guests, a chair scraping against grass, the musicians adjusting themselves near the front. None of it reached the small, still space that had opened between June and the man beneath the trees. Nathan looked nothing like the photographs. Corinne still kept in a box upstairs. He was thinner by enough that his suit jacket seemed to hang from him rather than fit him. The scar at his temple caught the late afternoon light. His left leg rested differently from his right, forcing his weight onto one side. Even his posture had changed. The Nathan June remembered had lifted both children at once and carried grocery bags in one trip because he refused to make two. The man standing beyond the last row of chairs looked as if simply remaining upright for too long still cost him something. Most of the guests glanced at him without recognition. Why would they recognize a dead man? Some had never met Nathan. Others knew him only from old photographs shown during the first months of Corinne's grief. Those who had known him before stared with the confused caution people reserve for a face that resembles somebody impossible. June knew him, not immediately with her mind, with her body. Nathan raised one hand. It was barely a wave. His fingers opened once, then folded halfway in again. I remembered the gesture only after I saw June's face. Nathan had used it whenever he came home, and found June watching from across a room, a tiny private greeting, as if the two of them had noticed each other before anyone else had. June made a sound that did not become a word. Nathan's mouth moved. I could not hear him from where we stood. June could not either. But she took one step forward, then stopped. She looked at me. That moment stayed with me longer than almost anything that happened afterward. Her father was standing alive less than 50 yards away. Yet June looked at me, as though happiness itself required permission. I understood exactly what held her in place. She had been excited about stars before Nathan disappeared. She had wished for him to spend more time at home. She had learned that wanting something intensely could summon punishment. Now, the impossible thing she wanted most was standing in front of her, and somewhere inside her, the frightened 8-year-old was still waiting for the price. I tightened my hand around hers. You're allowed to be happy, nothing else. I did not tell her to run. I did not tell her who Nathan was. I did not ask her to believe me. June looked back at him. Nathan had not moved closer. Later I understood what that cost him. Every instinct in him must have been telling him to cross the lawn and take his daughter into his arms. But he had already missed almost 2 years of her life without choosing it. He was not going to take another choice from her now. June released my hand. She walked 3 steps, then 4. Something inside her broke open. Dad! The first word tore through the lawn. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. June began running. Not carefully. Not with the small, measured movements I had watched all summer. She ran so fast one of her shoes nearly slipped from her heel. Dad! You came back! The second cry carried across the chairs. Nathan's face collapsed. He opened his arms. He tried to lower himself for her, and one knee nearly failed. The victim advocate beside him reached instinctively toward his elbow, but Nathan steadied himself against a chair and got down far enough. June hit him with enough force that I was afraid she would knock him over. His arms closed around her. For months I had imagined what that reunion might look like if Nathan were truly alive. Nothing I imagined contained enough silence. June did not speak after the scream. She buried her face against him. Nathan pressed one hand against the back of her head and the other between her shoulders. His entire body shook. I could see his mouth moving against her hair. Whatever he said belonged to her. For those few seconds, the wedding disappeared. So did the investigation. So did every terrible question. There was only a 10-year-old girl holding the father she had believed she killed. Then glass shattered behind me. I turned. Corinne had dropped the champagne flute she was holding. It struck the stone edge beside the aisle and broke at her feet. Her face was almost colorless. Preston stood several steps away, watching her. He had not yet understood everything, but he saw what I saw. Corinne did not move toward Nathan. She did not gasp his name and run toward the husband she had once told everyone she would have given anything to see alive again. She stepped backward. One step, then another. Fear. Not shock alone. Fear. Preston's expression changed. The distinction was tiny, but final. Guests began murmuring. Someone said Nathan's name. Another person insisted it could not be him. A woman near the rear of the chairs stood to see better. Others followed. The officiant stopped speaking to a coordinator and looked toward the commotion. Corinne recovered faster than I expected. Of course she did. For nearly 2 years, recovery had been her greatest skill. She drew herself upright. The first thing she attacked was reality. She said the man was confused, ill, that everyone needed to stay calm. Her voice carried because the lawn had become so quiet. She said Nathan had suffered a catastrophic injury and clearly was not well. She did not explain how she knew enough about his condition to characterize him. She moved past that contradiction before most people could catch it. Then she turned toward June. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The sentence made my skin go cold. June lifted her face from Nathan's shoulder. Corinne said the child was overwhelmed and having an episode. There it was. Even with a dead man alive in front of her, my sister tried to make June the unreliable thing in the picture. Nathan looked across the lawn at Corinne. I watched recognition move through his face differently from the way it had with me. There was no joy, no uncertainty. His body tightened. The advocate touched his shoulder and said something quietly, reminding him where he was, perhaps reminding him that officers were nearby and that confronting Corinne was not why he had been brought there. Nathan stayed where he was. June did not. She turned toward her mother. "He's my dad," Corinne started to answer. Nathan interrupted, "But not with anything about the crash." "June." She looked back. His voice was slower than I remembered, but steady. "Sunday mornings." June stared at him. Nathan raised one hand, as if holding an invisible spatula. "You said my pancakes looked like rocks from space." A tiny wrinkle appeared between June's eyebrows. "Meteorites." Nathan smiled through tears. "Meteorites." Something in June's face gave way. Not because the memory proved his identity to a court. That had already happened days earlier, through records, medical history, and proper verification. This was for her. A father who remembered the insult his 6-year-old daughter used for his terrible breakfast. June threw her arms around him again. Behind us, Preston looked at Corinne. This time she could not tell him what he had seen. She tried anyway. She said Nathan was obviously being coached. People had fed him family details. Laurel had been interfering for months. Investigators had filled his damaged memory with suggestions. June was vulnerable, and this entire scene was dangerous. Her sentences came too fast. Each one contradicted the last. If Nathan was not Nathan, why was she explaining his memory? If June was imagining the reunion, why was Corinne afraid of what Nathan remembered? If the man was simply ill, why was Corinne looking toward the parking area, instead of toward him? I watched her eyes. She was calculating distance. Then she saw Cole. He stood beside Evelyn near the house, confused and frightened, too young to understand why the father he had spent nearly 2 years mourning was suddenly kneeling on the grass. Corinne moved toward him, not quickly at first. She took his hand. Cole looked up at her. She said they were leaving. Preston stepped into her path, not aggressively. He asked where she was going. Corinne told him she needed to get Cole away from the chaos. Her voice was sharp now. He reminded her that the ceremony had not even begun. That was when she pulled harder on Cole's hand and turned toward the parking area. A member of the venue security team noticed. I saw him raise his radio. The officers staged lower on the mountain had been waiting to approach Corinne under controlled circumstances. The plan had never been to drive onto the ceremony lawn with sirens screaming. The plan had depended on Corinne remaining where everyone expected her to be. Now the subject of an arrest warrant was moving rapidly toward a vehicle with a 7-year-old child. Security spoke into the radio. I could not hear the words. I did not need to. A few seconds later, the first siren rose from somewhere below the property. The sound came faintly through the trees. Then louder. Another joined it. Heads turned toward the mountain road. June flinched inside Nathan's arms. For one terrible second, I saw the old belief return to her face. She had run to her father. She had allowed herself to be happy. Now, sirens were coming. Her body tightened as if the universe had answered. I crossed the remaining distance and crouched beside her. This is not because you ran to Dad. She looked at me. The sirens grew louder. I pointed not at the road but at the adults. Remember what I told you. Her eyes filled. Adults are responsible for adult choices. The words came from her this time. I nodded. Nathan heard them. His expression changed. He looked at me, then at June, and I knew he understood something about the work that had happened while he was gone. Corinne reached the edge of the parking area before 2 security staff members calmly blocked the path toward the cars. They did not touch her. They did not seize Cole. They simply told her officers were coming and asked everyone to remain where they were. She released Cole's hand, as if suddenly realizing how the scene looked. Cole ran toward Evelyn. The first law enforcement vehicle came up the private road with lights flashing. The siren stopped as it reached the main area, but by then the entire wedding had heard it. The sound had already done what Corinne had spent 2 years trying to prevent. It had made private consequences impossible to hide completely. Guests stepped back. Nobody applauded. Nobody began chanting for justice. People were frightened, confused. Some lowered their phones when staff asked them not to crowd the area. Others whispered questions nobody could answer. The officers did not rush Nathan. They did not ask June to prove anything. They already knew who Nathan was. They went toward Corinne. That was when June began shaking. Nathan felt it. He pulled back enough to see her face. She looked at him as though afraid to ask the question that had governed her life for 23 months. Why did you leave? The entire lawn could have disappeared around us. Nathan did not look at Corinne. He looked only at his daughter. His answer came slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because his speech still required care when emotion pushed too hard. I didn't drive away because of you. June's lips parted. Nathan took one breath. I was trying to get you and Cole somewhere safe until we fixed what was happening at home. June stared at him. The words seemed too large for her to understand all at once. Nathan did not give her the crash. He did not tell her about headlights above the ravine, Corinne approaching, his plea for help or footsteps leaving. That truth belonged somewhere else. Not here. Not in front of wedding guests. Not while June was still discovering that the foundation of her guilt had never existed. I was mad, she whispered. Nathan's face tightened. Not at you. You left after I called you. I came home because you needed me. She shook her head once, almost violently. Corinne's version had lived in her too long to leave politely. Nathan held her hands. I should have protected you sooner. That was all he gave himself. No excuse. No attempt to become the perfect father. Simply because he had survived. June started crying. Not the quiet tears I had seen, when she believed sadness itself inconvenienced people. These came hard. Nathan pulled her against him again. I watched 23 months of guilt lose its first battle. Not disappear. Lose ground. Across the lawn, officers spoke to Corinne. They identified her. They confirmed the warrant. I heard enough to understand that she was being arrested, not merely asked a few questions at the wedding. They did not describe the entire case to the crowd. They did not announce that she was guilty. A warrant meant probable cause and process, not conviction. Corinne demanded to know what Nathan had told them. One officer told her that was not a conversation they were having on the lawn. Her face twisted. For the first time that day, she stopped performing the grieving widow, the composed mother, and the bride. She looked at Nathan. The fear I had seen when the glass fell returned. Preston saw it too. Whatever questions remained for investigators, his personal answer about the wedding was already settled. He walked to the officiant. There was no speech, no dramatic accusation. He said quietly that the ceremony would not be taking place. The officiant nodded. That was all. Months of preparation ended in less than 10 seconds. Corinne heard. She looked at Preston with disbelief. He did not meet her halfway. There are moments when relationships do not end because someone announces the end. They end because one person stops helping the other sustain a lie. Preston turned away and asked staff to make sure guests had transportation and somewhere inside to wait until the situation was stable. He did not approach Nathan. He did not claim the children. He did not make himself the hero of what had happened. He simply stopped being one of Corinne's supports. Evelyn reached June and Cole. Cole stood staring at Nathan. Unlike June, he had been 5 when Nathan disappeared. His memories were smaller, less certain. He stayed close to Evelyn, holding her hand, watching the scarred man embracing his sister, as though trying to fit him over the father inside his mind. Nathan looked toward him. His face crumpled again, but he did not reach. Cole. The boy hid partly behind Evelyn. Nathan nodded. He seemed to understand. One child had run. The other was not ready. Both responses belonged to them. Evelyn put an arm around Cole and another around June when June finally stood. For months, I had watched my mother try to protect Corinne from unbearable truth. Now, when her daughter was being arrested 20 yards away, Evelyn chose the children. She did not go to Corinne. That may have been the moment Corinne finally understood how much had changed. The officers turned her toward the path leading away from the ceremony lawn. She was not handcuffed theatrically in the middle of the aisle for the benefit of guests. Everything was controlled as much as circumstances allowed, but there was no hiding that she was leaving with law enforcement rather than marrying Preston. Corinne looked at June. I saw the old machinery begin again. The same machinery that had survived grief, suspicion, social services, investigators, Nathan's return, and an arrest warrant. Blame. If reality became unbearable, give it to the child. Look what you've done. The words carried farther than she probably intended. June went white. Her hands began shaking so violently I reached for her. For one terrible heartbeat, I thought Corinne had done it again. I thought that after everything, after Nathan standing alive, after his explanation, after every ledger page, June might still accept the burden automatically, because that was what her body had learned. She looked at the broken champagne glass near the aisle, at the police vehicles, at the guests, at Preston, at Nathan, then at her mother. The shaking did not stop. Courage did not make her calm. That mattered. June was still terrified when she answered. No. Corinne stared at her. June swallowed. This one is yours. Nobody cheered. Thank God. The sentence did not need applause. It belonged to June. For the first time, she returned blame before it could settle inside her. Corinne's face went blank. Then officers guided her away. The mountain became strangely quiet after the vehicles left. Not peaceful, just emptied of the sound everyone had been waiting around. Wedding guests drifted toward the house in small, uncertain groups. Staff began removing glasses and helping older relatives find places to sit. Preston disappeared briefly with members of his family and venue management. Nobody knew what to do with flowers meant for a ceremony that never happened. I remember thinking how ridiculous grief could make objects look. Hundreds of white petals, perfect chairs, an altar with no marriage. June sat on the grass near the last row because her legs no longer seemed interested in holding her. Nathan remained several feet away. That surprised her. She looked at him. He looked exhausted. The emotional strain had drained what little color remained in his face. One hand trembled against his knee. The advocate stayed close enough to intervene if he needed help. Nathan could have moved beside June without asking. He was her father. But almost 2 years of absence had changed what fatherhood entitled him to assume. "Can I sit with you?" June looked at me. Not for permission this time, for steadiness. I sat down on the grass beside her. She took my hand. Then she looked back at Nathan. Yes. Nathan lowered himself carefully onto the grass beside her. He did not pull her into another hug. He did not tell her everything would be fine. He simply sat. June reached toward him after a while and placed 2 fingers against his sleeve, as though confirming again that fabric and skin occupied real space. Her other hand stayed locked around mine. Nathan noticed. He did not ask her to let go. That was how the 3 of us sat after the wedding ended, without becoming a wedding. June holding her dead father with one hand, and the aunt who had stayed with the other, because bringing someone back from the dead did not bring back the years he had missed. And none of us yet knew what a family was supposed to do with that. The first night after the wedding, June did not sleep in her own house. Neither did Cole. There was no dramatic moment when someone handed me their bags and announced that the children belonged with me now. Nathan's return did not erase the fact that, on paper and in practice, he had been absent for almost 2 years, had recently emerged from severe neurological rehabilitation, and was still rebuilding the basic rhythms of an independent life. Corinne's arrest did not automatically transfer parental authority to whoever the family thought deserved it most. Child welfare workers, family court professionals, and the adults around June and Cole had to do something much less satisfying than declaring a winner. We had to make the next day safe. Then the day after that. The first temporary arrangement involved Evelyn and me, sharing most of the practical care while Nathan underwent evaluation and began supervised gradual reintegration with the children. I slept at my mother's house the first several nights, because neither June nor Cole wanted another unfamiliar place. Nathan stayed separately nearby with support connected to his recovery. June understood almost none of the legal structure. What she understood was that Dad was alive and Mom was gone. That combination did not make her peaceful. It made her vigilant in entirely new directions. The first time Nathan left after an afternoon visit, June stood at Evelyn's front window until his car disappeared. Then she asked what road he was taking. The second time, she wanted to know who was driving. For weeks, if Nathan was more than 5 minutes late, her body changed before she said anything. Her shoulders stiffened. She listened for engines. She stared at the phone. Once, during an early evening visit, Nathan dozed off in a chair after becoming cognitively exhausted. June crossed the room and stood beside him for nearly a minute. I watched her hand hover over his chest. She was checking whether it moved. Nathan opened his eyes. June jumped back. Neither of them pretended she had been doing something else. He told her she could check if she needed to. That was both kind and heartbreaking. Nathan's return had disproved one terror and awakened another. Before, June feared her happiness could make people disappear. Now she feared that somebody who returned once could disappear again. Healing, I learned, rarely replaces one belief with a perfect opposite. It usually begins when a child discovers she can be afraid and still survive the fear. Cole had his own version. He did not run into Nathan's arms on the wedding lawn. It took days before he allowed physical affection that lasted more than a few seconds. He remembered his father, but his memories belonged to a 5-year-old. Nathan was simultaneously familiar and strange. Cole asked practical questions. Why did Dad walk differently? Why was his hair grayer? Did he remember Cole's old room? Did he know what grade Cole was in? Sometimes Nathan knew the answer. Sometimes he did not. The first time he admitted he could not remember one of Cole's early birthdays, Cole looked wounded. Nathan looked worse. I expected him to invent something. He did not. He said his brain had lost parts of his life, and that he was angry about that too. Then he asked Cole to tell him what happened at the birthday. It was not the fatherhood Nathan wanted to return to. It was the fatherhood available. That difference became the foundation of everything. The criminal case continued while our household learned how to function without turning every meal into a discussion of it. Investigators did not build it on June's notebook or on Nathan's damaged memory alone. His account was tested against the repair records, crash photographs, the old motorist's statement, Evelyn's timeline, and Corinne's delayed call materials already in existence before Nathan was identified. June's torn page mattered mainly because it showed her memory had not been invented after the case reopened. The resulting chronology was hard enough without repeating every exhibit. Nathan had decided the children needed somewhere calmer while the adults addressed what was happening at home. Corinne followed him, deliberately struck the rear side area of his vehicle to force him to stop, then reached the crash area, knew he was alive, heard his plea for help, and left without calling 911. That final choice remained the part I had the most difficulty fitting inside the sister I remembered. The case moved for months, through ordinary hearings, filings, and delays. Corinne ultimately entered a plea resolving the serious felony charges supported by the intentional vehicle contact and her failure to stop and render aid, and she received meaningful multi-year incarceration. During the same period, the March legal death decree was formally corrected, so Nathan's civil identity matched the fact that he was alive. The number mattered less to June than adults expected. When I told her the case was over, her first question was whether she still had to talk about it, not how many years Corinne received, only whether she could stop carrying the case through every conversation. I told her yes. Responsibility had been assigned. June did not have to keep proving it. The parenting questions followed a separate path. Restrictions on Corinne's contact were handled through family court and child welfare professionals, rather than treated as an automatic extension of the criminal punishment. June and Cole were never asked to perform forgiveness for a judge, a social worker, or the rest of us. Nathan's role grew slowly. At first, visits had schedules. Then they lasted longer. Then came ordinary tasks. Homework, dinner, library pickups. A Saturday afternoon, in which nothing dramatic happened, and Nathan fell asleep during a documentary, while Cole complained that old people could not stay awake. June laughed at that, then stopped herself. The stopping happened less often over time. Nathan moved through his own recovery without becoming the man he had been before the crash. His left leg still tired quickly. Loud, complicated environments exhausted him faster than he liked to admit. Some memories returned. Others did not. He sometimes lost words when stressed. He sometimes had to rest after a morning that would once have been effortless. June hated those limits at first, not because she blamed him, because every limitation reminded her that getting him back had not undone what happened. One afternoon she became angry when Nathan declined an outing because he was too fatigued. She told him he had already missed almost 2 years. The second the sentence left her, horror crossed her face. The old June would have apologized immediately. She would have decided her anger might make him leave. Instead, Nathan sat with the sentence. He told her she was allowed to be angry about the time they lost. He was angry too. Then he rested, and returned the next day. That repetition became more important than any speech. June could be disappointed, Nathan returned. June could be angry. Nathan returned. She could disagree. He returned. Slowly, her nervous system began learning something Corinne had spent 2 years teaching out of it. Conflict was not the same thing as catastrophe. Preston never resumed the wedding plans. There was no private reconciliation after the cameras disappeared. No decision that Corinne had simply been overwhelmed and deserved another chance at the life she had been building. He ended the relationship permanently and refused the requests that came through intermediaries to help manage the public story around what had happened. He never tried to remain June's replacement father. He sent the astronomy atlas back with a few belongings after the wedding and stepped away from a role that no longer belonged to him. I respected him more for leaving cleanly than I would have respected some grand promise to stay forever. The rest of the family changed in quieter ways. Nobody gathered for a dramatic confrontation with Corinne. Nobody formed a cheering mob outside a courthouse. What disappeared, instead, was protection. Relatives who had once repeated the phrase "brave widow" stopped using it. People stopped telling Evelyn that family business should stay private. Nobody asked June to think about how hard prison would be for her mother. When one relative suggested that maybe all of us needed to move forward for Corinne's sake, Evelyn ended the conversation before I could. My mother had finally learned that peace was not a moral position when one person paid for all of it. Corinne's attorney eventually contacted me about practical family matters and support. I cooperated where the children's welfare required it. I did not pay her legal expenses. I did not sign statements softening what I had witnessed. I did not tell June that reconciliation would make her a better daughter. Those were boundaries, not revenge. The hardest consequence Corinne faced was not the collapsed wedding or even the prison sentence. It was the loss of authorship. For years, she had decided what every event meant. Cole broke something because June excited him. Nathan drove away because June upset him. The family fought because June could not let go. The wedding became stressful because June remained difficult. Even her own arrest became, for one final second, something June had supposedly done. That power was gone. Facts belonged to everyone again. Evelyn's apology came in November. She did not plan a family meeting around it. She waited until a quiet afternoon when June was doing a puzzle at her dining table, and Cole was outside kicking a ball against the fence. I was in the kitchen making tea. Nathan had gone to a rehabilitation appointment. Evelyn sat across from June. She looked more nervous than I had seen her while speaking with investigators. There is something different about apologizing to a child. Adults cannot hide behind professional language. My mother told June that she had kept excusing Corinne because she believed grief made people do things they would not normally do. Every time I challenged her, Evelyn thought I was making Corinne's grief harder. She believed keeping the family together was the same thing as protecting it. Then she said the sentence June deserved. I kept thinking protecting your mother's grief was protecting the family. I was protecting the wrong person. June looked down at the puzzle. Evelyn did not ask whether she was forgiven. She did not say she hoped June understood. She did not turn her regret into another emotional task for the child. She only said she was sorry, and that whatever relationship June wanted with her from then on, Evelyn would earn it rather than demand it. June put one puzzle piece into place. Then she asked Grandma if she wanted to help find the corner pieces. That was not forgiveness. Not exactly. It was an invitation to remain at the table. Evelyn understood the difference. By winter, the reality ledger spent more time closed. June still used it when her thoughts became tangled, but she no longer opened it after every broken glass, late arrival, or thunderstorm. Once, Cole knocked over a carton of milk at breakfast. June grabbed a towel. That was all. No apology. No glance toward the ceiling waiting for punishment. I noticed. She did not. Those were my favorite victories. The ones that became ordinary before anyone announced them. Nathan's breakfast disaster happened in February. By then, he was spending much more regular time with the children, and had reached the stage of recovery where he was desperate to reclaim small pieces of who he used to be. Somebody I still blame, Cole reminded him about the meteorite pancakes. Nathan decided to recreate them. The problem was that the old pancakes had looked terrible accidentally. These looked worse despite effort. The first came out burned on one side and almost raw on the other. The second folded itself when Nathan tried to flip it. The third landed partly on the stove. June sat at the kitchen island watching with growing disbelief. Nathan stared down at his creation. "I remember being better at this." "You weren't?" I said. He looked offended. June smiled. Cole inspected the blackened edge of one pancake with the seriousness of a medical examiner. Then he looked at Nathan. "Did the crash happen to breakfast too?" There was one heartbeat of silence. I worried the joke had crossed somewhere it should not. Then Nathan laughed. A deep, startled laugh. I followed. June did too. She laughed hard enough that she bent over the counter, and then I saw it. The pause. Her laughter stopped. Her eyes moved instinctively toward the window. Then the stove. Then Nathan. She waited. For thunder. For a phone call. For broken glass. For someone to vanish. Nothing happened. Nathan turned another pancake badly. Cole complained that this one looked like Florida after an earthquake. I poured coffee. The furnace clicked on. Outside, a car drove past. Ordinary sounds. June stared at the plate. Then she reached across the counter. "I want another one." Nathan looked at the pancakes. "You sure? That one has a less dangerous side." She took it and kept eating. I had once thought June's healing would have a dramatic moment when she finally announced she knew she was not cursed. Instead, one of the clearest signs arrived because she chose a second bad pancake after laughing. By spring, Nathan was spending enough ordinary life with the children that the word return no longer described one day. It described hundreds of repetitions. Appointments, school pickups, lost pencils, arguments about bedtime. Cole asking Nathan questions at exactly the moment Nathan tried to read. June teaching him the constellation Preston had once identified incorrectly. Nathan still drove only when medically cleared and comfortable. At first, June asked about every trip. Later, she stopped asking sometimes. Then most times. The missing years remained missing. We stopped pretending the goal was to recover them. We were building years that had not happened yet. One cool spring evening, June brought the blue ledger outside. A meteor shower was expected after dark. We had driven beyond the brighter city lights to a quiet place where the Blue Ridge spread black against the sky. Nathan sat in a folding chair because his leg tired on uneven ground. Cole lay on a blanket with binoculars he kept using backward despite repeated correction. Evelyn poured hot chocolate from a thermos. June sat beside me with the notebook open across her knees. The cloth cover was worn now. She turned past pages filled with question marks, unfinished sentences and facts she once needed me to help separate. Then she reached a blank page. I did not tell her what to write. Her pencil moved slowly. What happened? Mom followed Dad. Their cars hit. Dad survived. She stopped, looked at the sentence, then continued. What I controlled. None of the adults' choices. The next section took longer. What I didn't control. The crash. Dad's injuries. Mom leaving him. Mom's lies. June rested the pencil against the final heading. Months earlier, the same words had been impossible. This was not mine to carry. She wrote them. No question mark. No hesitation. I felt tears rise and did not hide them quickly enough. June caught me. You're doing the weird crying thing. I'm allowed. She rolled her eyes. That too felt like healing. Cole shouted that he had seen the first meteor. Nobody believed him because his binoculars were still backward. Then a real streak of light crossed the sky. Nathan tilted his head upward. Evelyn whispered something I could not hear. June closed the notebook. For several minutes we watched in silence as brief white lines appeared and vanished above us. I thought about the girl on Corinne's porch the previous June who had refused an astronomy program because the last time she made a big wish, her father disappeared. I thought about Kevin, the star that apparently looked like a Kevin. The weather app accused of bad luck. A crooked vase with legs. Meteorite pancakes. Tiny pieces of childhood returning one at a time. Another meteor crossed the sky. I nudged June gently. "You want to make a wish?" She did not tense. That was the first thing I noticed. She thought about it. Cole sat up immediately. "Don't wish for a surprise puppy." June looked at him. "Why?" "Because I want to pick it. You don't get to pick my wish." "I live there too. Wishes are private." Cole considered this deeply, then announced that private wishes should still require puppy approval. Nathan laughed. Evelyn told him that was not how wishes worked. For a few moments, everybody was talking at once. Nobody was careful. Nobody checked whether joy had become too loud. June smiled. Then she looked back at the sky. "What are you wishing for?" I asked. She shook her head. "Private." But months later she told me. She had not wished for Corinne to stay in prison forever. She had not wished for Nathan's memory to become perfect. She had not wished for the crash never to have happened. She had wished that next year, all of us who were there could come back and watch the sky together again. An ordinary future. Another spring. The expectation that people she loved could still be there. That was the wish. And for the first time since her father disappeared, June made a wish without apologizing for wanting it to come true.